Family drove their cat to be put down, but he escaped, and what happened next? The rain fell in sheets that Thursday morning, drumming against the roof of the old Buick as it pulled into the veterinary clinic's parking lot. Inside the car, Martha Wilson clutched a pet carrier on her lap, her knuckles white against the plastic handle. Her husband Robert sat silently behind the wheel, his face a mask of practiced stoicism that barely concealed his pain. "We're doing the right thing," he said, more to himself than to Martha. "Dr. Peterson said there's nothing more they can do. It's kinder this way." Martha nodded, but tears welled in her eyes as she peered through the small grated door at the cat inside. Ashen, named for his soft grey coat that had once been plush and beautiful, lay curled in the corner of the carrier. At 15 years old, his once bright eyes had clouded, his slender frame had grown thin, and lately he'd stopped eating altogether. The diagnosis had been grim: kidney failure, arthritis, and possibly something more sinister growing inside him. "I know," Martha whispered, running a finger along the carrier's edge. "But he's been with us since before the grandkids were born." The rain intensified as Robert turned off the engine. "I'll go check us in," he said, his voice catching slightly. "You wait here where it's dry." Martha nodded, watching as her husband of 47 years hunched his shoulders against the downpour and made his way toward the clinic's entrance. Through the windshield she could see other pet owners coming and going, some with happy, healthy animals, others with faces that mirrored her own sadness. Inside the carrier, Ashen stirred. His ears perked forward at the sound of car doors slamming nearby, the patter of rain on metal. For weeks he had felt the change in his body, the aches that never subsided, the strange tiredness, the lack of appetite. But in this moment, something stirred within him. A memory of younger days when he would perch on windowsills and watch birds flutter in the garden, when he would chase toy mice across the living room carpet with abandon. When Martha shifted to reach for her purse, the latch on the carrier, worn from years of use, slipped slightly. The small door, never quite closing properly since Robert had dropped it last Christmas, loosened just enough. Robert returned, raindrops glistening in his silver hair. "They're ready for us," he said softly. "Are you sure you want to come in? I can do this alone if—" "No," Martha replied firmly. "We brought him home together. We'll see him off together." Robert nodded, then reached for the car door handle. As it swung open, the sudden movement, combined with Martha's shifting to exit the vehicle, caused the pet carrier to tilt forward. In that moment, something remarkable happened. Ashen, who had barely moved in days, summoned a strength that seemed impossible for his frail body. As the carrier door swung open, he leapt, a grey flash against the rain-soaked pavement, and darted between two parked cars. "Ashen!" Martha cried, dropping her purse in shock. Robert lunged after the cat, but Ashen was already moving with surprising speed across the parking lot, weaving between vehicles. "He's heading for those buildings." Robert pointed toward a row of small businesses and warehouses that bordered the veterinary complex. Martha stood frozen, rain soaking her blouse and hair. "Robert, we have to find him." But Ashen had already disappeared, a small grey ghost vanishing into the mist rising from the warm pavement. His last glimpse of his owners was of their bewildered faces, their hands reaching out, their voices calling his name, as the rain washed away his scent and his tracks. What had begun as an ending had suddenly, unexpectedly, become something else entirely. As Ashen crouched beneath a dumpster behind a coffee shop, his heart pounding and his wet fur clinging to his thin frame, he faced an unfamiliar world, without the comfort of the home he'd known for 15 years. What would become of an elderly cat, abandoned not by cruelty but by circumstance, in a world that rarely noticed the small and vulnerable? And what of the humans he'd left behind? What would they do now that their final goodbye had been stolen from them? As the rain continued to fall, washing away the day and bringing the first hints of evening, Ashen curled into himself for warmth. Somewhere in the distance, he could still hear Martha calling his name, the sound growing fainter as darkness settled over the town of Millfield. What had been planned as his final day had become instead his first day of something entirely unexpected. And so began the journey of a cat too old to start over, yet somehow finding himself doing exactly that. Before we continue with the story, I want to ask you for something very special. Please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like and leave a comment. Every single action makes a difference and helps our project grow. For 3 days, Ashen remained hidden behind the coffee shop, venturing out only when hunger drove him from his shelter. The alley offered some protection, an overhanging roof that kept the worst of the rain at bay. and the warmth from the kitchen vents that made the nights bearable. But it was a far cry from the cushioned window seat where he had spent most afternoons in the Wilson home, watching birds and soaking in sunlight. On the fourth morning, Ashen was startled awake by the clatter of a metal door swinging open. A young man in a stained apron emerged, carrying a trash bag that reeked of coffee grounds and spoiled milk. The man paused, noticing the grey cat pressed against the wall. "Hey there, buddy," he said, his voice gentle. "You lost?" Ashen didn't move, his golden eyes fixed warily on the stranger. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "Hungry?" "It's turkey. Probably better than whatever you've been finding." He unwrapped the sandwich and placed it on the ground before retreating back inside. The scent of meat was overwhelming to Ashen, who hadn't eaten properly in days. Still, he waited until the door closed before approaching cautiously. The first bite of turkey was like a revelation, his body remembering what it meant to be hungry, to be alive. He devoured the offering, licking crumbs from the pavement. As the days passed, Ashen established a tentative routine. The coffee shop employee, whose name, according to his name tag, was Jake, would appear each morning with scraps of food. Other employees occasionally left water in a shallow dish. Ashen never approached them directly, maintaining a careful distance, but the reliable food source gave him strength. By the second week, Ashen had begun exploring beyond the alley. The area behind the veterinary clinic was a small commercial district, a strip mall with a hardware store, a laundromat, a bookstore, and several other businesses. Beyond that lay residential streets lined with modest homes, their backyards offering potential hiding places and sources of food. It was during one of these explorations that Ashen encountered his first real challenge. As he padded carefully along a fence line, a large orange tabby appeared, back arched and fur bristling. The territorial display was unmistakable. This was someone else's claimed space. Ashen had never fought another cat. His indoor life had protected him from such confrontations. But survival instinct took over, and he made himself appear as large as possible, hissing weakly. The standoff lasted only moments before the orange cat lunged. The fight was brief but intense, a flurry of claws and teeth that left Ashen with a torn ear and a newfound understanding of this outside world. He retreated, limping slightly, having learned a valuable lesson about territory and boundaries. That night, a heavy storm rolled through Millfield. Lightning cracked the sky, and thunder rumbled so deeply that Ashen could feel it in his bones. The alley offered little protection from the driving rain, which seemed to come from all directions at once. Soaked and shivering, Ashen abandoned his usual spot and sought better shelter. He found it behind a small warehouse several buildings down, a loading dock with a deep overhang and stacks of wooden pallets that created dry, secluded spaces. The air smelled of grain and wood, earthy and comforting. Ashen squeezed into a narrow gap between pallets, finding it dry and relatively warm. Exhausted from the day's exertions and the stress of the storm, he fell into a deep sleep. Morning came with the rumble of trucks and the shouts of workers. Ashen remained hidden, watching as men loaded and unloaded crates and bags. The activity continued throughout the day, but his hiding place remained undiscovered. When night fell again, he ventured out, exploring his new surroundings more thoroughly. The warehouse backed onto a residential street, where neat houses with small yards stood in orderly rows. Ashen padded along the sidewalk, staying close to hedges and fences. The night air carried unfamiliar scents, cooking foods, garden plants, other animals. Everything was new, overwhelming in its complexity. Near the end of the street stood a small white house with a wooden porch. Unlike the other homes which glowed with television screens or dinner preparations, this one was quiet, with only a single light burning in what appeared to be a kitchen window. Ashen approached cautiously, drawn by something he couldn't quite identify. The porch steps creaked slightly under his weight. The boards were worn smooth, warm from the day's sun. A wicker chair sat empty, a faded cushion offering a tempting place to rest. Ashen was about to leap onto it when he heard movement inside the house. The door opened slowly and an elderly woman peered out. She wore a faded floral housecoat, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. When she spotted Ashen, she didn't gasp or exclaim. She simply nodded, as if his presence was expected. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice low and gentle. "You look like you've had a rough go of it." Ashen tensed, ready to flee, but something in the woman's manner kept him from bolting. She moved slowly, returning inside before reappearing with a small dish. The smell of chicken reached Ashen's nose as she set the dish on the far end of the porch. "I'm Miriam," she said, settling into the wicker chair. "You eat that if you want. No pressure." She didn't reach for him or make any sudden movements. Instead, she simply sat, hands folded in her lap, gazing out at the quiet street. After several minutes of this peaceful coexistence, Ashen inched toward the dish. The chicken was still warm, and the taste brought a flood of memories. Martha's kitchen, Sunday dinners, the comfort of routine. "That's it," Miriam murmured. "You take your time." When he had finished eating, Ashen retreated to the porch steps, watching the woman warily. She didn't seem to mind his caution, continuing to sit in comfortable silence. Eventually she rose with a soft groan. "My old bones need rest," she said. "You're welcome to stay on the porch if you like. It might rain again tonight." The door closed behind her, but the porch light remained on, casting a warm glow over the weathered boards. Ashen waited for a long time, ensuring she wouldn't return, before cautiously curling up on the chair cushion. It was the softest bed he'd had since leaving the Wilson home, and despite his wariness, exhaustion soon pulled him into sleep. In the morning, he awoke to find a fresh bowl of water beside the empty dish. Of Miriam there was no sign, though he could sense her presence behind the curtained windows. Ashen stretched, feeling the morning sun warm his fur. For the first time since his escape, he felt something beyond mere survival, a flicker of what might almost be called hope. As he leapt from the porch and padded back toward the warehouse district, where he still felt safest during daylight hours, Ashen carried with him the memory of kindness, and perhaps the beginning of an answer to the question that had haunted him since that rainy day in the parking lot. Could he ever trust humans again? Or was he destined to live the remainder of his days in solitary survival? The answer, he was beginning to suspect, might be more nuanced than he had initially believed. And in a quiet corner of Millfield, an elderly woman named Miriam sat at her kitchen window, watching for the return of a grey cat, who reminded her that unexpected connections could still form, even in the autumn of life. Millfield Elementary School stood 3 blocks from Miriam's house, a brick building surrounded by asphalt playgrounds and chain-link fences. For Ashen, it became an unexpected sanctuary during the daylight hours. The school grounds offered numerous hiding places, bushes along the building's foundation, spaces beneath portable classrooms, a storage shed near the playing fields. More importantly, it offered something that had become increasingly precious to him: food. Children were messy eaters, and the playground after lunch recess was scattered with dropped sandwich crusts, abandoned apple cores, and occasionally, entire snacks forgotten in the excitement of games. Ashen had discovered this bounty one Monday morning, drawn by the shouts and laughter of children at play. Initially, he had kept his distance, watching from beneath a hydrangea bush as small feet raced past. But hunger had eventually drawn him closer, and he discovered that most children were too absorbed in their activities to notice a cautious grey cat skirting the edges of the playground. It was during his 3rd week of scavenging that Ashen was first spotted by a group of 3rd graders. He had just retrieved half a peanut butter sandwich from beneath a bench when a high-pitched voice exclaimed, "Look, a kitty!" Ashen froze, sandwich dangling from his mouth, as 3 small faces peered at him from around the bench. Their expressions ranged from delight to concern. "He looks really skinny," said a girl with braided hair and glasses, "and his fur is all messy." "Maybe he's lost," suggested another child, a boy with a missing front tooth. "I think he's hungry," said the third, a quiet girl with dark eyes. She reached into her lunchbox and pulled out a cheese stick. "Can cats eat cheese?" Before her friends could answer, she had broken off a piece and tossed it gently in Ashen's direction. It landed a foot away from him. The children held their breath, watching. Ashen hesitated. His experiences with humans had been mixed at best since his escape. Miriam had been kind, but she was the exception. Most adults he encountered shooed him away or ignored him entirely. These small humans seemed different, though, curious rather than threatening. After a moment's consideration, he dropped the sandwich and cautiously approached the cheese. "He's eating it," the boy whispered excitedly. "Do you think he has a home? If he does, they're not taking very good care of him," the girl with glasses replied, her young voice serious with concern. "My mom says pets need to be brushed and fed proper food, not just scraps." The quiet girl reached into her lunchbox again. "I have tuna salad today. Cats like tuna, right?" Thus began a daily ritual. The 3 children, Emma, Tyler, and May, would save portions of their lunches for the school cat, as they came to call him. They enlisted friends to do the same, and soon Ashen had a small contingent of admirers who watched for him each day. They left offerings at the edge of the playground where he felt safest, respecting his wariness and never trying to approach too closely. Not everyone was pleased with this arrangement, however. Mr. Callan, the school's janitor, viewed Ashen as a nuisance. Another mess to clean up, another problem to manage. A tall man with perpetually furrowed brows, he carried a broom like a weapon, sweeping it threateningly whenever he spotted the grey cat on school grounds. "Shoo, get out of here," he would call, his voice gruff. "This isn't a place for strays. You'll bring fleas, and who knows what else." The children defended their feline friend fiercely. "He's not hurting anyone, Mr. Callan," Emma would argue. "He's just hungry." "And he's not a stray," Tyler would add, though he had no evidence to support this claim. "He probably lives nearby and just visits." Mr. Callan remained unmoved. "Rules are rules, kids. No animals on school property unless they're part of a class project. Principal's orders." The standoff became a daily occurrence. Mr. E. Callan with his broom, the children with their indignation, and Ashen caught in the middle, learning to time his visits to avoid the janitor's rounds. It was a careful dance of timing and strategy, one that Ashen, despite his age and infirmity, mastered with surprising agility. One Tuesday afternoon, when dark clouds threatened rain and the playground had emptied early, Ashen found himself cornered by Mr. Callan behind the cafeteria dumpsters. The janitor had approached silently, rubber-soled shoes betraying nothing of his approach until it was too late to flee. "Got you now," Mr. Callan muttered, broom raised. "Time to find somewhere else to hang around." Ashen pressed himself against the wall, fur bristling, golden eyes wide with fear. He was too old and too tired to outrun the man, and there was nowhere to hide. Just as Mr. Callan took another step forward, a voice called out from around the corner. "Mr. Callan, are you back there?" The janitor paused, turning toward the voice. "Ms. Daniels, yes, I'm just taking care of a little pest problem." A woman appeared, middle-aged with a kind face and graying hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore a cardigan with musical notes embroidered along the hem. Ashen recognized her as the music teacher. He had sometimes lingered near the open windows of her classroom, drawn by the sound of children singing. "Oh," she exclaimed, spotting Ashen. "Is that the cat the children have been talking about?" Mr. Callan nodded, his expression stern. "Been trying to run it off for weeks. It doesn't belong here." Ms. Daniels approached slowly, studying Ashen with gentle eyes. "He looks like he's had a hard time of it, poor thing." She turned to Mr. Callan. "You know, when I was growing up, our school had a cat. Old Tom, we called him. He kept the mice away and taught us all about responsibility and kindness." "That was then," Mr. Callan replied. "These days we've got health codes and liability issues. What if it scratches someone? What if it's sick?" Ms. Daniels smiled. "What if it teaches these children something textbooks can't? About compassion for creatures who can't speak for themselves?" She knelt down, keeping a respectful distance from Ashen. "He's not feral, that's clear enough. Look at his eyes. He's used to people. He's probably lost or abandoned." Mr. Callan's broom lowered slightly, still against the rules. "Rules sometimes need bending, Don." Ms. Daniels stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "What if we reached a compromise? The cat stays outside, the children don't try to bring it into the building, and they clean up after their feeding sessions. In return, you don't chase it away with that broom." The janitor hesitated, his weathered face conflicted. "Principal won't like it." "Let me handle Principal Barnes," Ms. Daniels said with a wink. "I've got a parent who's a vet. I'll ask her to stop by and make sure he's not carrying anything concerning. Would that help?" After a moment's consideration, Mr. Callan sighed deeply. "Fine, but if there's any trouble, any at all, the cat goes. Understand?" Ms. Daniels nodded, beaming. "Perfectly. Thank you, Don. The children will be thrilled." As the adults walked away, continuing their conversation, Ashen remained pressed against the wall, heart racing. He had not understood their words, of course, but he had sensed the shift in tension, the averted threat. More importantly, he had witnessed something remarkable, one human defending him against another. The encounter left Ashen unsettled, confronting him with conflicting emotions. Part of him, the part that remembered warm laps and gentle strokes, the comfort of belonging, longed to trust these humans who showed him kindness. Another part, the part that recalled the carrier, the veterinary parking lot, the abandonment, warned against such vulnerability. These thoughts accompanied him as he made his way back to Miriam's porch that evening. The old woman was in her usual place, the wicker chair creaking softly as she rocked. A bowl of water and a small plate of chicken waited on the top step. "There you are," she said quietly, as Ashen appeared at the edge of the yard. Was wondering if you'd stop by tonight. Ashen approached cautiously, maintaining the distance he always kept, but as he bent to drink from the water bowl, he allowed himself to linger a moment longer than usual, his golden eyes meeting Miriam's faded blue ones. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement perhaps of shared solitude. "You remind me of someone," Miriam murmured, her voice soft with memory. "Had a cat like you when I was first married. Grey as morning mist he was, and just as quiet. Samuel, we called him." Ashen listened to the cadence of her voice, finding comfort in its gentle rhythm, even as he remained alert for any sudden movement. When he had finished eating, he did something he had never done before. Instead of immediately retreating, he settled on the porch steps, tucking his paws beneath him, watching as twilight deepened into night. Miriam smiled, but made no comment on this development. She simply continued rocking, occasionally humming snatches of old songs that drifted on the evening air, like fragments of another time. Later, as Ashen made his way back to his sleeping place behind the warehouse, he found himself thinking about the day's events. The janitor's broom, the music teacher's intervention, Miriam's quiet acceptance. In a world that had proven unpredictable and often hostile, these small kindnesses stood out like beacons. Was it possible, he wondered, to navigate between complete trust and total isolation, to accept offerings of food and shelter without surrendering the independence that had kept him alive these past weeks? And what of the deeper hunger that food alone could not satisfy, the longing for connection, for the comfort of familiar touch? These questions followed Ashen into his dreams, where he ran through endless parking lots, always escaping, always searching for something just beyond reach. Above him, in these dreams, storm clouds gathered, promising rain that never fell, while distant voices called a name he could no longer remember was his own. The first Sunday of October dawned clear and crisp, the air carrying the distinctive scent of autumn, fallen leaves, wood smoke, and the earthy sweetness of apples ripening in nearby orchards. Ashen had developed a routine by now, dividing his time between the school grounds during weekdays, occasional visits to Miriam's porch in the evenings, and a rotation of other locations where food might be found, behind the bakery where day-old bread was sometimes discarded, near the small park where weekend picnickers often left crumbs, and around the dumpsters of several restaurants on Main Street. Sundays, however, presented a challenge. The school was empty, most businesses closed early, and the park was often too crowded with families for Ashen to approach safely. It was on one such Sunday, as he padded quietly along Cedar Street, that a new sound caught his attention. Voices raised in song, drifting through the cool morning air. The sound emanated from a white clapboard building with a slender steeple, St. Mark's Community Church. Ashen had passed it many times, but had never approached, deterred by the crowds that gathered there each weekend. Today, though, hunger drove him closer. He circled the building cautiously, noting the open windows that allowed the autumn breeze and the music to flow freely between inside and out. At the rear of the church, Ashen discovered a small garden with stone benches and a bird bath. A side door stood slightly ajar, propped open to catch the pleasant morning air. The singing was louder here, accompanied by the gentle notes of a piano. Something about the melody stirred a distant memory, Martha Wilson humming as she watered plants, the radio playing softly in the background of the home Ashen had left behind. Hesitating at the threshold, Ashen peered inside. The corridor was dim and empty, the singing coming from somewhere deeper within the building. The scent of flowers and candle wax mingled with the mustier smell of old hymnals and wooden pews. No one was in sight. His whiskers twitched as he considered his options. The open door offered shelter, possibly food, but also the risk of being discovered and chased away. Yet something beyond hunger drew him forward. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps the pull of the music itself, or maybe just the instinctive seeking of warmth as the autumn days grew shorter and colder. Silently, Ashen slipped through the doorway. His paws made no sound on the carpeted hallway as he followed the music, pausing frequently to listen for approaching footsteps. The corridor opened into a larger space, a fellowship hall, though Ashen couldn't have named it as such. Tables were arranged around the perimeter, some bearing plates of cookies and pitchers of lemonade, evidence of a gathering to come. A plate of unattended sandwiches caught his attention. Ashen was considering how to reach them when a door opened at the far end of the hall. He darted beneath the nearest table, pressing himself against the wall as a group of people entered, their voices animated with conversation. "Choir sounded lovely today, Evelyn," said an elderly man, his cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the floor. That new arrangement of amazing grace nearly moved me to tears. "Thank you, George," replied a woman's voice. "We've been working on it for weeks." The children's part at the end was Rebecca's idea. Well, it was inspired. "Speaking of which, is there coffee? I could use a cup before the meeting starts." More people filtered into the room, their conversations creating a low hum that both concealed and threatened Ashen's presence. From his hiding place, he could see shoes and the hems of dresses and trousers as people moved about, serving themselves refreshments and finding seats. A child's sneaker came dangerously close to his hiding spot, then moved away. Ashen remained perfectly still, his heart racing. There was no clear path to escape now. The door through which he had entered was across the room, past too many feet and too many potential eyes. His only option was to wait and hope for an opportunity to slip away unnoticed. The meeting began, something about community outreach and holiday planning. Ashen paid little attention to the words, focusing instead on controlling his breathing and remaining invisible. Minutes stretched into an hour. His legs cramped, but he dared not shift position. Eventually, the voices rose in what seemed to be a concluding prayer, followed by the scraping of chairs and renewed conversations. People began to disperse, some leaving through the main door, others lingering to help clean up. Ashen tensed, ready to make his move when the crowd thinned enough to provide a clear path to freedom. But before that moment came, another door opened, one he hadn't noticed before, closer to his hiding place. Light spilled into the fellowship hall, along with the sound of children's voices. "Can we have cookies now, Ms. Rebecca?" asked a young voice that Ashen recognized as belonging to Tyler from the playground. "Yes, but just one before lunch," replied an adult. "Your parents will be here soon." Several pairs of small feet scurried into the room, heading directly for the cookie plate. Ashen pressed himself flatter against the wall, but it was too late. A familiar face appeared, peering under the table. "The school cat!" Emma exclaimed, her glasses sliding down her nose as she dropped to her knees. "Look, Tyler, it's him!" More faces appeared. Tyler, May, and several other children Ashen recognized from the playground. Their excited voices overlapped. "What's he doing here? How did he get inside? Is he hungry? Can we keep him?" An adult face joined the circle, a young woman with curly hair and a kind expression. "What have you found, children?" "It's the school cat, Ms. Rebecca," Tyler explained. "He must have followed us to church." Ms. Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. "Ah, the famous school cat I've been hearing so much about." She studied Ashen thoughtfully. "He doesn't look feral. I wonder if he's lost." "Mr. Callan doesn't like him," May said solemnly, "but Miss Daniels says he can stay as long as we clean up after feeding him." "Well," said Ms. Rebecca, "church is supposed to be a sanctuary for all God's creatures, but I don't think under the fellowship hall table is the best place for him. Let's see if we can help him find his way out." She reached toward Ashen slowly, making soft clicking sounds with her tongue. "Here, kitty." "It's all right, no one's going to hurt you." Ashen's instinct was to flee, but he was cornered. As the woman's hand approached, he tensed, a low growl building in his throat. "Careful," warned Emma. "He doesn't like being touched. We've tried at school." Ms. Rebecca withdrew her hand. "I see. Well, let's give him some space then." She stood and urged the children back. "Maybe if we clear a path to the door, he'll leave on his own." The children reluctantly created a corridor between the table and the side door. Ms. Rebecca placed a small piece of sandwich on the floor, creating a trail leading outside. "Sometimes kindness means letting someone find their own way," she told the watching children. Ashen waited until the humans had retreated to a safe distance before emerging cautiously from beneath the table. He snatched the first piece of sandwich, then the second, following the trail toward the open door and freedom. The children watched in fascinated silence as he made his way across the room. Just as he reached the doorway, however, another door opened, and a man's deep voice called out, "Rebecca, are the children ready for pickup?" Startled, Ashen bolted, but instead of running outside as intended, he darted deeper into the church, down a carpeted corridor, and through another half-open door. He found himself in the sanctuary, empty now, except for a single elderly woman arranging flowers at the altar. She didn't notice as Ashen slipped beneath a pew, his grey fur blending with the shadows. The sanctuary was silent except for the occasional rustle as the woman moved among the flowers. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting pools of colored light across the wooden floor. The air smelled of beeswax and hymnals, of wood polish and fresh flowers. Despite his fear, Ashen found the space oddly calming, the high ceiling creating a sense of openness, the empty pews offering countless hiding places. He remained hidden as the flower arranger finished her task and left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Alone in the quiet sanctuary, Ashen felt his racing heart begin to slow. The church bells chimed noon, their resonant tones vibrating through the wooden pews. After determining that no one was likely to return soon, Ashen emerged from his hiding place and cautiously explored his surroundings. The plush carpet was soft beneath his paws as he padded down the center aisle. Dust motes danced in the colored light from the windows, creating an almost magical atmosphere. At the front of the sanctuary, carpeted steps led up to the altar, where the freshly arranged flowers filled the air with their sweet scent. Exhausted from his ordeal, Ashen climbed the steps and settled himself in a patch of sunlight beside the altar. The warmth eased the ache in his aging joints, and the quiet soothed his frayed nerves. Without intending to, he drifted into sleep. He was awakened sometime later by the sound of the door opening and voices entering the sanctuary. Blinking awake, Ashen realized that the light had shifted. Several hours had passed. Before he could retreat to a hiding place, the voices fell silent. "Oh my," said a woman's voice. "Look at the altar." Ashen was fully visible now, his grey form illuminated by a shaft of late afternoon sun that streamed through the western windows. He rose quickly, but instead of fleeing, something made him pause. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps some instinct told him that running would only trigger pursuit. Instead, he sat very still, golden eyes regarding the small group that had entered. They stood in the center aisle, Ms. Rebecca, the flower arranger from earlier, an elderly man with a clerical collar, and a middle-aged woman Ashen had never seen before. Their expressions ranged from surprise to wonder. "It's the cat from earlier," Ms. Rebecca explained in a hushed voice, "the one the children found under the table. He must have been here all afternoon." "At the altar, no less," said the minister, his voice tinged with amusement. "Seeking sanctuary, perhaps?" The middle-aged woman stepped forward slightly, studying Ashen with professional interest. "He's underweight, and that coat needs attention, but he doesn't appear feral. See how he's watching us? He's used to people." She turned to the others. "I'm Claire Watson, by the way, the veterinarian Rebecca called about the school cat. I wasn't expecting to find him in the church, though." "None of us were," replied the flower arranger, whose name tag identified her as Evelyn Thompson. "But there he sits, bold as brass, like he belongs here." "Maybe he does," said the minister softly. "The children have been learning about St. Francis and his love for animals. Perhaps this is a practical lesson." He smiled at Ashen. "Welcome to St. Mark's, little friend. All are welcome here." Claire Watson moved slowly toward the altar steps, speaking in the calm, measured tones she used with nervous animals in her clinic. "I'd like to check him over if I could. He may need medical attention." Ashen tensed as she approached, memories of the veterinary clinic parking lot flooding back. The carrier, the fear, the desperate leap to freedom, all of it had begun with a place like hers. He backed away, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Claire stopped immediately. "He's frightened, and that reaction to a vet's approach suggests he may have had a traumatic experience with medical care." She retreated a few steps. "I won't force the issue. If he's been surviving on his own, he's resilient enough to continue for now. Perhaps with time and regular feeding, he'll become more trusting." "The children have been feeding him at school," Ms. Rebecca offered, "and they say he's been around for weeks now." "Then someone in town is looking out for him," Claire said. "That's a good start." As they spoke, Ashen remained at the altar, his golden eyes moving from face to face. Something about this place, the peaceful quiet, the gentle voices, the absence of sudden movements or loud noises, eased his wariness. When Evelyn slowly approached and placed a small dish of water on the top step, he didn't retreat. "Perhaps we should let him be for now," suggested the minister. "He's found a quiet place to rest. God knows we all need that sometimes." The small group nodded in agreement and began to file out of the sanctuary. Claire Watson lingered a moment longer, her professional concern evident in her furrowed brow. "I'll leave some information with you about community resources for strays," she told the minister, "and I'd be happy to come back if he allows a closer examination." When they had gone, closing the door quietly behind them, Ashen approached the water dish. The cool liquid soothed his throat, parched from hours without drinking. As twilight deepened outside the stained glass windows, he settled once more in his spot by the altar. The church bells marked the passing hours, 6 o'clock then 7, their resonant tones vibrating through the empty sanctuary. Eventually the door opened again, and Ms. Rebecca entered with a small plate. "I brought you some dinner," she said softly, placing the plate beside the water dish. "The minister says you can stay the night if you wish. It's supposed to rain again." She didn't approach closely or attempt to touch him, for which Ashen was grateful. The food, bits of chicken and fish, was fresh and flavorful, far better than the scraps he had grown accustomed to. After eating, he groomed himself meticulously, aware of Rebecca watching from a respectful distance. "You know," she said conversationally, "the children think you're magical. They say you appeared at the school right when they were learning about animal helpers in history, and now you've found your way to our church on St. Francis Sunday." She smiled. "Coincidence, probably. But it makes them wonder, and wondering is the beginning of faith, isn't it?" Ashen had no response to offer, of course, but he found her voice soothing. When she finally left, promising to return in the morning, he felt an unfamiliar sensation, not quite contentment perhaps, but a temporary peace. The church was warm and dry, free from the threats that lurked in the outside world: territorial cats, speeding cars, unpredictable humans with brooms. For the first time since his escape, Ashen slept deeply, undisturbed by hunger or fear. In his dreams he was younger, stronger, racing through sunlit gardens with the boundless energy of kittenhood. The faces of the Wilsons floated through these dreams, Martha's gentle hands offering treats, Robert's deep laugh as Ashen batted at shoelaces. He woke several times, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, before the quiet dignity of the sanctuary reminded him where he was. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through the eastern windows. Ashen stretched, feeling the pleasant ache of muscles that had truly relaxed for the first time in weeks. The sanctuary door remained closed, but a small cat-sized opening had been created at the bottom of a nearby window, offering freedom without forcing it. Ashen approached this exit cautiously. Beyond the glass lay the church garden he had noticed the day before, now glistening with dew. Freedom beckoned, the ability to come and go on his own terms, to maintain the independence that had kept him alive. Yet the sanctuary offered safety, comfort, and regular meals, if yesterday's visit from Rebecca was any indication. The choice embodied the central conflict that had defined his existence since the day of his escape: security versus autonomy, the comfort of human care against the dignity of self-determination. Could he find a middle path, a way to accept kindness without surrendering his hard-won independence? As if in answer, the door to the sanctuary opened, and Ms. Rebecca entered with another plate of food. She noticed him by the window and smiled. "Good morning. I see you found the exit Father James created for you. You're free to go whenever you wish, but you're also welcome to stay." She placed the plate in the same spot as before. No pressure either way. The aroma of fresh fish rose from the plate, impossibly tempting. Yet the open window called to him with equal strength, the promise of morning air, of movement unrestricted by walls, of choices made freely. In that moment, Ashen made a decision that would shape the days to come. He approached the plate and ate his fill, accepting the offering with dignity rather than desperate hunger. Then, with deliberate steps, he walked to the window and slipped through the opening into the garden beyond. But this was not a rejection of the sanctuary or its keepers. Rather, it was the beginning of a new arrangement, one in which Ashen would come and go as he pleased, accepting shelter and food when needed, but maintaining the freedom that had become as essential to him as breath itself. As he made his way across the dewy grass toward the school, where the children would soon arrive with their lunchboxes and their gentle voices, Ashen carried with him the memory of peaceful rest beside the altar. The echo of voices, raised in song, in conversation, in welcome, followed him like a blessing, a reminder that even in a world that had once betrayed him, kindness could still be found. And in the sanctuary he had left behind, Ms. Rebecca watched his departure with understanding eyes. "Go with God, little wanderer," she murmured, "and know you have a place to return to." The golden days of October gave way to the sharper chill of November. Trees that had blazed with color now stood bare against slate-gray skies, their fallen leaves forming crackling carpets along Millfield's sidewalks. For Ashen, the changing season brought new challenges. Rain fell more frequently, sometimes turning to sleet that stung his fur and made his old bones ache. Nights grew longer and colder, forcing him to seek more substantial shelter than the loading dock behind the warehouse. Fortunately, his network of safe havens had expanded. The church sanctuary remained available through the small window opening, which Father James had made permanent. Miriam's porch now featured a small, waterproof shelter crafted from an old plastic storage bin lined with blankets. Even the school had become more welcoming since Ms. Daniels' intervention. The maintenance shed was left slightly ajar on especially cold days, an arrangement Mr. Callan grudgingly tolerated as long as Ashen didn't venture inside the main building. More significant than these physical shelters, however, was the web of human connections that had begun to form around the grey cat. The children at the school spoke of him constantly, drawing pictures that decorated Ms. Daniels' classroom wall. Miriam had taken to walking slowly to the corner market each morning, Ashen following at a careful distance, a ritual that gave purpose to both their days. And at St. Mark's, his occasional appearances in the sanctuary had become something of a local legend, with some parishioners claiming that his presence during services brought a special blessing. It was Claire Watson, the veterinarian, who remained most concerned about Ashen's physical condition. Though he had filled out somewhat thanks to regular feeding, his age and the hardships of outdoor living were taking their toll. His limping had become more pronounced, especially in cold weather, and his coat, while cleaner thanks to regular grooming, still lacked the luster of good health. "He needs proper medical care," Claire told Rebecca one afternoon as they watched Ashen sunning himself in the church garden. "Vaccines, parasite treatment, blood work to check his kidney function. At his age, he should be on a special diet, possibly medication." "I know," Rebecca sighed. "But how do we help someone who runs every time we get close enough to try?" The question lingered between them, unanswered but pressing. Claire had made several gentle attempts to examine Ashen, each time respecting his boundaries when he showed signs of distress. She had even brought treats laced with mild supplements, which he sometimes accepted if left where he could approach on his own terms. "There's a free vaccination clinic coming up at the community center," Claire said after a thoughtful pause. "We could try to bring him in, though I hate the idea of traumatizing him with capture." Rebecca nodded, her expression troubled. "Let me talk to the children who feed him at school. Maybe they have some insights. He seems most comfortable with them." The following week, as frost etched delicate patterns on windows across Millfield, Claire set up her mobile clinic in the community center gymnasium. Tables lined one wall, covered with medical supplies, vaccination materials, and educational pamphlets about pet care. Volunteers helped manage the line of people who had brought their pets for free checkups, mostly elderly residents on fixed incomes and young families struggling to make ends meet. Claire was examining a large tabby with respiratory issues when a commotion at the entrance caught her attention. Rebecca had arrived with Emma, Tyler, May, and several other children from the school, all looking excited and nervous in equal measure. "Dr. Watson," Emma called, waving energetically. "We have Operation Grey Ghost underway." Claire raised an eyebrow at the dramatic name, but quickly finished her examination, prescribed medication for the tabby, and made her way to the group. "Operation Grey Ghost?" Tyler nodded seriously. "That's our code name for getting the school cat, Ashen, to the clinic." "Ashen?" Claire looked to Rebecca for explanation. "The children decided he needed a proper name," Rebecca explained. "They voted, and Ashen won because of his color. More dignified than Grey Ghost, which was the runner-up." "I see," Claire said, smiling at the children's thoughtfulness. "And what exactly is this operation of yours?" May stepped forward, holding a crudely drawn map of the neighborhood. "We've been watching his patterns," she explained, her quiet voice serious. "He goes to the church in the mornings, then the school at lunch, then usually to Miss Miriam's house in the evenings." Emma adjusted her glasses importantly. "We figured out he doesn't like pet carriers. He runs away whenever anyone brings one near him, but he will follow food trails, especially when it's tuna or chicken. So," Tyler continued, "we're going to make a trail from the school to here, since it's only 2 blocks. Miss Daniels is helping, and so is Miss Miriam." Claire glanced at Rebecca, impressed by the children's planning but skeptical of their chances of success. "That's very thoughtful, but Ashen is pretty wary." "I'm not sure—" "Look," May interrupted, pointing toward the door. There, peering cautiously around the gymnasium entrance, was a familiar grey form. Ashen's golden eyes surveyed the room warily, taking in the unfamiliar space with its strange smells and sounds. Behind him stood Miss Daniels and Miriam, both looking pleased and surprised. "He followed the whole trail," Miss Daniels said quietly, "never more than a few feet behind us." "I've never seen anything like it," Miriam nodded, her wrinkled face alight with quiet pride. "He's a smart one. Knew we were up to something, but came anyway." Claire moved slowly, signaling the volunteers to continue their work without drawing attention to Ashen's arrival. "Let's not crowd him," she murmured. "Rebecca, could you and the children set up a quiet space in the corner? Use those screens to create a little exam room away from the other animals." While they worked, Ashen remained at the threshold, neither advancing nor retreating. His tail twitched nervously, and his ears swiveled to catch every sound. But something, curiosity perhaps, or the presence of so many familiar humans, kept him from bolting. Miriam approached him slowly, moving with the careful deliberation of age. "Come on, old fellow," she said in the same tone she had used each evening on her porch. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." To everyone's amazement, Ashen allowed her to come within a foot of him, closer than he had ever permitted before. He sniffed the air, whiskers quivering, before taking a tentative step into the gymnasium. The children watched, hardly daring to breathe, as Ashen followed Miriam to the quiet corner Claire had prepared. A towel had been laid on the examination table, and the screens provided a sense of enclosure without confinement. Claire stood back, allowing Miriam to guide Ashen at his own pace. "That's it," Miriam murmured, as Ashen cautiously sniffed the table edge. "Nothing to fear." With gentle hands that belied her age, Miriam lifted Ashen onto the table. He tensed but didn't struggle, his golden eyes fixed on her face with what might almost be called trust. The children gasped softly at this unprecedented development. "Well done, Miss Miriam," Claire said quietly, approaching with slow, measured steps. "You have quite a way with him." Miriam shrugged, though her eyes shone with quiet satisfaction. "We understand each other, that's all. Both of us getting on in years, both of us set in our ways." She kept one hand gently on Ashen's back, a reassuring presence as Claire began her examination. Working with practiced efficiency, tempered by exceptional gentleness, Claire checked Ashen's eyes, ears and teeth. She palpated his abdomen, listened to his heart and lungs, and assessed his overall condition. Throughout, she maintained a running commentary, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Good strong heartbeat, ears are clear, no mites. Some dental issues, but that's common at his age. Fur is improving. Still some mats to work on. Weight is better than I expected. You've all been feeding him well." The children watched intently, their faces solemn with the responsibility of witnessing this important moment. Tyler took notes on a small pad, recording everything Claire said for later reference. When it came time for vaccinations, Claire moved with particular care. "This will pinch a bit," she told Ashen, as if he could understand. "But it will help keep you healthy." Ashen flinched at the needle but remained surprisingly calm, Miriam's gentle hand and soft murmurs seemingly enough to overcome his fear. When the basic examination was complete, Claire took a small blood sample for testing and trimmed the worst mats from his fur. "Well," she said finally, stepping back with an approving nod, "considering what he's been through, he's in remarkably good shape. His teeth need attention, and I'm concerned about his kidneys given his age, but those are issues we can address over time." She looked at the assembled group, children, teachers, and Miriam, with genuine appreciation. "You've all done wonders for him already. What happens now?" Emma asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "Does he need a real home? With, walls and stuff?" Claire considered the question carefully. "Ideally, yes. Most cats his age should be indoor pets with regular care, but Ashen isn't most cats," Rebecca finished for her. "He's made it clear he values his independence." Miriam stroked Ashen's head gently, earning a barely audible purr, the first any of them had heard from him. "Maybe there's a middle way," she suggested, "not forcing him indoors full-time, but making sure he has safe, warm places to go when he needs them." "A community cat," Ms. Daniels suggested, "with multiple caretakers." Claire nodded slowly. "It's unconventional, but it might work. I can provide medical support and supplies. If enough people are willing to offer shelter and consistent care—" "We are!" Tyler exclaimed, looking around at his friends, who nodded enthusiastically. "We can make a schedule and everything. And I'll coordinate," Rebecca offered. "Keep track of his movements. Make sure he's being seen regularly." Miriam said nothing, but her gentle stroking of Ashen's fur spoke volumes about her commitment. Throughout this conversation, Ashen had remained on the examination table, observing the humans with an inscrutable gaze. There was something almost dignified in his posture. A cat who had faced abandonment, survived on his own, and now found himself at the center of an unlikely community, neither fully wild nor fully tame, but somewhere uniquely his own. When the examination was complete and the plan roughly sketched, Claire prepared a small kit of supplements and medications. "He'll need these mixed with his food," she explained to Miriam, who had been designated the primary food provider given Ashen's preference for her porch, "and I'd like to see him again in 2 weeks to follow up on the blood work results." As they prepared to leave, the question arose of how to transport Ashen back to familiar territory. No one wanted to risk traumatizing him with confinement after such a successful visit. "I think," said Miriam thoughtfully, "that if we simply walk home the way we came, he might follow again. No need for carriers or cages." "Is that safe?" Claire asked, professional concern evident in her voice. "What if he runs off or gets scared by a car?" Miriam smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "Sometimes you have to trust Dr. Watson. Him to know his way and us to be patient enough to walk at his pace." And so, in a scene that drew curious stares from passers-by, an unusual procession made its way from the community center through the streets of Millfield. An elderly woman walking slowly with the aid of a cane, a middle-aged veterinarian carrying a medical bag, a Sunday school teacher, a music teacher, and a group of children walking 2 by 2 as if on a field trip. Several feet behind them, maintaining a careful distance but never losing sight of the group, padded a grey cat with golden eyes. The journey took twice as long as it might have, with frequent pauses, when Ashen stopped to investigate interesting scents or rest his aging limbs, but no one complained or hurried him. Instead, they matched their pace to his, turning what might have been a simple walk into something approaching a ceremony, a public acknowledgement of his place in their community. When they reached the church, Father James was waiting on the steps. He raised an eyebrow at the unusual procession but smiled warmly. "I see Operation Grey Ghost was a success?" "Beyond our wildest hopes," Rebecca replied. "Ashen now has a clean bill of health, relatively speaking, and a care plan." "Excellent news." The minister's gaze found Ashen, who had paused at the edge of the church garden. "And has our friend decided where he'll be staying tonight?" As if in answer, Ashen padded across the garden to the small window entrance to the sanctuary. He paused there, looking back at the assembled humans as if waiting for something. "I believe," said Father James with gentle amusement, "that he's waiting for someone to open the main door. The window serves in a pinch, but perhaps he'd prefer a more dignified entrance today." Rebecca laughed and moved to open the sanctuary door. Ashen waited until it was fully open before walking, not trotting, not rushing, but walking with deliberate steps into the church that had become one of his havens. As the group began to disperse, plans made for tomorrow's feeding schedule and next week's follow-up visit, Miriam lingered on the church steps. Claire noticed her thoughtful expression and paused beside her. "Penny for your thoughts, Miss Miriam?" The older woman smiled, her eyes following the last of the children as they headed toward home, still chattering excitedly about the day's adventure. "I was just thinking, when my Harold passed 5 years ago, I thought my days of being needed were over. My children are grown with families of their own, my friends getting fewer each year." She gestured toward the church where Ashen had disappeared. "And then this old cat shows up on my porch as lost as I was. Funny how life works sometimes." Claire nodded, understanding more than Miriam might have guessed. In her practice, she had seen countless times how animals could bring purpose and connection to those who needed it most. "He chose well when he chose your porch." "Did he choose? Or was he led?" Miriam mused, more to herself than to Claire. "Either way, I'm grateful." She straightened, adjusting her grip on her cane. "Well, I'd best be getting home. He'll likely come by for dinner later, and I wouldn't want to disappoint him." As Claire watched Miriam make her careful way down the church steps, she reflected on the day's events. What had begun as a simple medical intervention had revealed itself as something much more profound, a community coming together around one of its most vulnerable members, finding in that care a deeper connection to each other. Ashen, the cat who had escaped death only to find himself homeless and alone, had inadvertently become the thread that wove together lives that might otherwise never have intersected. Children and elders, church members and school staff, a veterinarian, and a retired bookkeeper. Inside the sanctuary, Ashen had already settled in his favorite spot beside the altar, bathed in the colored light from the stained glass windows. His recent adventure had been tiring, but not without reward. For the first time since his escape, the persistent ache in his joints had eased thanks to the medicine Claire had administered. His stomach was full, his fur cleaner, and his body free of the parasites that had plagued him for weeks. More significant than these physical improvements, however, was the shift in his relationship with the humans who had entered his life. He had allowed Miriam to touch him, not just to feed him or provide shelter, but to touch him with gentle hands that sought only to comfort and heal. It was a small step perhaps, but an important one for a cat who had lost trust in the species that had once been his sole companions. As evening shadows lengthened across the sanctuary floor, Ashen drifted into sleep, his dreams no longer filled with endless flight or remembered abandonment. Instead, He dreamed of warm porches and gentle hands, of children's voices and quiet sanctuaries. In these dreams, he was neither fully wild nor fully tame, but something unique, a cat with the freedom to choose his path and the security of knowing that wherever that path led, he would not walk it entirely alone. December arrived with a dramatic flourish, a snowstorm that transformed Millfield overnight, draping buildings in white and turning familiar streets into a wonderland of crystalline beauty. Children awoke to the magical news of a snow day, their exclamations of delight echoing through households across town as they rushed to don boots, coats and mittens for a day of sledding and snowball fights. For Ashen, however, the snow presented a more complicated reality. The pristine white blanket that delighted human residents created new challenges for a cat accustomed to moving freely between his various shelters. Pathways that had been easily navigable now required trudging through snow that reached his chest in some places, the cold wetness seeping into his fur and chilling him to the bone. The beauty of winter came with a bite that was particularly harsh for an elderly cat. On the morning after the storm, Ashen found himself trapped at St. Mark's, unable to follow his usual route to the school. The snow had drifted against the church doors, creating barriers too high for his aging legs to manage. Father James, arriving early to prepare for morning prayer, found Ashen pacing anxiously near the main entrance. I see our friend is reconsidering his outdoor lifestyle," the minister observed with gentle humor as he shoveled a path to the door. "Can't say I blame you, old fellow. It's bitter out here." Inside, the church was pleasantly warm, the aging radiators clanking and hissing as they worked to combat the chill. Father James prepared a fresh bowl of water and opened a can of the special food Claire had provided, a kidney-friendly formula mixed with the supplements that had already begun to improve Ashen's condition. He placed these offerings near the altar, where sunlight streaming through the stained glass created a warm pool on the carpet. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like," he told Ashen, who watched these preparations with dignified attention. "God's house has sheltered many travelers over the centuries. You're in good company." Throughout the day, various church members stopped by, Rebecca to play the piano for Sunday's service, Evelyn to check on the holiday decoration plans, volunteers to organize the food pantry for increased winter demand. Each expressed concern upon seeing Ashen confined indoors by the weather. "Should we let Miriam know he's here?" Rebecca asked. "She might worry if he doesn't show up for dinner." Father James nodded. "Good thinking. I'll give her a call, and perhaps we should inform our friends at the school as well. The children will wonder where their feline friend has disappeared to." Word spread quickly through what had become Ashen's extended family of caretakers. By afternoon, Tyler's mother had brought over a small cat bed, just until the snow melts, she explained, while Miss Daniels contributed a few toys, handmade from yarn scraps and feathers. Claire Watson called to provide advice on keeping Ashen comfortable during his confinement. "The important thing is to maintain his sense of independence," she stressed. "Make sure he has places to retreat if he feels overwhelmed, and don't try to pet him unless he initiates contact." For Ashen, the snow day became an unexpected lesson in adapting to circumstances beyond his control. The sanctuary that had been one of several way stations in his nomadic existence now became, temporarily at least, his primary residence. He explored corners he had previously ignored, discovered sunbeams that moved across the floor in predictable patterns, and established favorite perches from which to observe the comings and goings of humans. Most surprising to those who watched him was his apparent acceptance of the situation. The cat who had once fled from any attempt at confinement now seemed to understand that the snow-blocked doors were not barriers imposed by humans, but by nature itself. Perhaps this distinction made the difference, or perhaps his growing trust in his caretakers had reached a point where temporary confinement no longer triggered panic. By evening, the sanctuary had taken on the feeling of an impromptu gathering place. Miriam arrived, brought by Rebecca, who had driven carefully through the snow-covered streets to collect her. She carried a small basket containing cat grooming supplies, a blanket that smelled of her home, and a thermos of soup for herself. "Thought I'd keep him company for a while," she explained, settling into a pew near Ashen's chosen spot. "My house gets too quiet on days like this." Father James, who had been preparing to lock up and head to the parsonage next door, nodded understanding. "Stay as long as you like, Miriam. I'll leave the side entrance unlocked in case you need anything." Left alone in the peaceful sanctuary, Miriam unwrapped her soup and poured a steaming cupful. The spicy scent of tomato and herbs filled the air, mingling with the familiar church smells of candle wax and old hymnals. Ashen, who had been dozing on his new bed, raised his head at the aroma. "Reminds you of something, does it?" Miriam asked, noticing his interest. "My Harold used to say my soup could bring the dead back to life on a cold day." She smiled at the memory, her wrinkled face softening. "Always made a big pot when snow was coming. Tradition, I suppose." Ashen watched as she sipped her soup, his golden eyes reflective in the gentle light from the table lamp Father James had left on. After finishing her simple meal, Miriam took out a brush from her basket, one designed specifically for cats, with soft bristles that Claire had recommended for Ashen's sensitive skin. "Now, I'm not going to force this on you," Miriam said conversationally, "but if you'd care to come a bit closer, this might feel nice on a cold evening." She held the brush where Ashen could see and smell it, then placed it on the pew beside her, making no move to approach him. Instead, she took out her knitting, a scarf in shades of blue and grey that she had been working on for weeks. The click of knitting needles filled the quiet sanctuary, creating a rhythm as soothing as a lullaby. Outside, wind whistled around the church eaves, driving fresh snow against the windows in soft patters. Inside, warmth and stillness created a haven from winter's sharpest edges. Whether it was the familiar scent of the blanket Miriam had brought, the rhythmic sound of her knitting, or simply the cumulative effect of weeks of gentle care, something prompted Ashen to rise from his bed and approach the pew where she sat. With careful dignity, he leapt up beside her, maintaining a respectful distance but closer than he had ever voluntarily come before. Miriam continued knitting, acknowledging his presence with only a small smile. "There you are," she said softly. "Nice to have company on a night like this, isn't it?" For several minutes they sat in companionable silence, an elderly woman and an elderly cat, each finding comfort in the other's presence. Then, with deliberate movements, Ashen took a step closer, then another until he was beside her. He sniffed the brush she had left on the pew, whiskers twitching with curiosity. "Before we continue with the story, I want to ask you for something very special. Please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and leave a comment. Every single action makes a difference and helps our project grow. Interested after all, are you?" Miriam set aside her knitting and picked up the brush, moving it slowly so as not to startle him. "May I?" She extended the brush toward him, not quite touching. Ashen hesitated, then leaned forward slightly, allowing the bristles to make contact with his cheek. The sensation, gentle pressure that eased the persistent itch of healing skin and removed loose fur, was unexpectedly pleasant. He leaned into it, just slightly. Encouraged, Miriam began to brush with long, gentle strokes, speaking softly all the while. "There we go. Feels good, doesn't it? My Samuel used to love being brushed. Would sit for an hour if I had the time." Ashen permitted the grooming, his posture gradually relaxing as Miriam worked carefully around his ears and along his back, avoiding the sensitive areas where Claire had noted arthritic pain. Loose fur collected on the brush, grey wisps that Miriam periodically removed and placed in a small paper bag she had brought for the purpose. "You're looking more handsome already," she told him. "Getting back some of your dignity, I'd say." As the brushing continued, Ashen's eyes began to close, his body responding to the gentle care with an involuntary relaxation. A sound emerged from deep in his chest, the rusty, halting purr of a cat who had almost forgotten how to express contentment. The vibration seemed to surprise him as much as it delighted Miriam. "Well, listen to that," she said softly. "You do remember how to sing." The purring continued, growing slightly stronger as Miriam found a particularly pleasant spot behind his ears. Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, an elderly cat who had known abandonment and an elderly woman who had known loneliness found unexpected solace in each other's company. When Miriam finally set the brush aside, her hands beginning to tire, Ashen did not immediately retreat to his bed as she expected. Instead, after a moment's consideration that seemed to hold the weight of significant decision, he settled beside her on the pew, his body not quite touching hers, but close enough to share warmth. "Well?" Miriam said, her voice catching slightly with emotion. "I do believe that's a compliment, Mr. Ashen." She returned to her knitting, and Ashen to his quiet observation, but something had shifted between them, a barrier lowered, a trust extended. They remained that way until Rebecca returned to drive Miriam home, finding them in the same pew, peaceful companions on a winter's night. "Look at you two," Rebecca said from the doorway, her voice hushed with wonder, "quite the picture of contentment." Miriam smiled, her wrinkled face luminous in the lamplight. "We've been having a nice chat about the weather and the state of the world. Haven't we, Ashen? Ashen, who had tensed slightly at Rebecca's entrance, relaxed again at the sound of Miriam's voice. He blinked slowly, a gesture that cat lovers recognize as one of feline affection and trust. "I almost hate to disturb you," Rebecca said, "but the roads are getting worse and I promised to have you home before dark." Miriam nodded understanding and began gathering her things. "Will you be all right here alone?" she asked Ashen, as if he might answer. "I'll come back tomorrow if the roads are passable." She stroked his head once very gently before rising. Ashen permitted the touch without flinching, a small miracle that brought tears to Miriam's eyes. "Progress," she whispered to Rebecca as they made their way toward the door. "Slow and steady, but progress all the same." The snowstorm continued for 3 days, transforming Millfield into a winter wonderland that delighted children while testing the patience of adults who needed to navigate its beauty for practical purposes. Schools remained closed, businesses operated on limited hours, and neighbors checked on neighbors as the community adapted to winter's dramatic arrival. Throughout this time, Ashen remained at St. Mark's, adapting to indoor life with surprising grace. Father James ensured that the side entrance remained accessible, shoveling a path and keeping it clear for the various visitors who came to check on the church's feline guest. The children, free from school, arrived in groups to play quietly in the sanctuary and share stories with Ashen, who watched their activities from comfortable perches with growing tolerance. Claire Watson made a special trip to check on his health, pleased to find that the extended rest and regular care were accelerating his improvement. "His coat is looking better already," she noted to Rebecca, as they watched Ashen sun himself in a patch of colored light from the stained glass, "and that limp is less pronounced. The consistent medication schedule is making a real difference." Miriam visited daily, her brushing sessions becoming a ritual that Ashen now actively anticipated. She would arrive in the afternoon, brought by various community members who had incorporated her transportation into their daily routines, and spend several hours in the sanctuary, knitting, reading aloud from her favorite books, or simply sitting in companionable silence as Ashen dozed nearby. On the 4th day, the snow stopped and the sun emerged, transforming the white landscape into a dazzling expanse of crystalline brilliance. Town crews cleared main roads, children built snowmen in yards, and life in Millfield began to return to its normal rhythms. At St. Mark's, Father James shoveled paths to all entrances, including the small window opening that had served as Ashen's private door. "There you are," he told the cat as he cleared the last of the snow away. "Freedom restored. You can resume your rounds whenever you're ready." The question that hung in the air, unspoken but present in the minds of all Ashen's caretakers, was whether he would choose to return to his nomadic existence now that the option was available. After days of comfort, regular meals, and growing connections, would the call of independence still prove stronger than the security of shelter? The answer came that afternoon, when Miriam arrived for her usual visit. Ashen was nowhere to be found in the sanctuary. Rebecca, who had driven Miriam as usual, checked all the church rooms and corners before returning with the news. "It seems our friend has decided to resume his travels," she said gently, seeing the flicker of disappointment on Miriam's face. "The window was open and there are cat tracks in the snow leading toward the school." Miriam nodded, her expression accepting, if a little sad. "Well, that's his choice, isn't it? Can't keep a wild thing if it wants to roam." They were preparing to leave when the side door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and the sound of children's voices. Emma, Tyler, and May burst in, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "Miss Miriam, Miss Rebecca," Emma called. "Guess what? Ashen visited the school today. He came right up to the cafeteria windows during lunch." Tyler nodded enthusiastically. Mr. Callan saw him too, but he didn't try to chase him away. He even said something about maybe putting a shelter by the maintenance shed. "He's on his way to your house now, Miss Miriam," May added, her quiet voice lifting with unusual animation. "We saw him heading that direction when school let out early." Miriam's face brightened at this news. "Is that so? Well then, perhaps I should hurry home to welcome him." As Rebecca drove carefully through the snow-covered streets, Miriam gazed out the window, thinking about the complex creature who had entered her life. Ashen had not abandoned the sanctuary or the connections he had formed there. He had simply reclaimed his freedom to move between the various places that now formed his expanded world. When they reached Miriam's small house, there was indeed a set of cat tracks leading up to the porch, delicate imprints in the snow that told the story of Ashen's journey from the church. past the school, and finally to this place that had become another anchor in his life. And there, curled on the cushion of the wicker chair, was Ashen himself. He raised his head as Miriam approached, acknowledging her with that slow blink that had come to mean so much. "Well, hello there," Miriam said, her voice warm with pleasure. "Decided to make the rounds today, did you?" Ashen stretched and stood, arching his back in a graceful curve. He had not waited passively for her arrival, but had chosen to come to her, a distinction that held profound meaning for them both. "Would you like to come inside?" Miriam asked, moving toward her door. "It's warmer, and I've got some of that special food Dr. Watson left for you." She opened the door and stepped aside, making no move to pick him up or usher him in, simply offering the choice. Ashen hesitated at the threshold, whiskers twitching as he sampled the unfamiliar scents of Miriam's home. After a long moment of consideration, he stepped across the threshold, not rushing, not fleeing, but walking with deliberate dignity into this new territory. Miriam followed him inside, closing the door against the winter chill. "Make yourself at home," she told him. "No pressure, stay as long as you like." And so began a new phase in Ashen's evolving relationship with the humans who had become his unlikely family. He did not abandon his other haunts. The church sanctuary still received regular visits, as did the school grounds and even the warehouse loading dock where he had first found shelter. But Miriam's house became another regular stop in his rounds, a place where he would sometimes spend hours on cold days, curled in a patch of sunlight on her living room rug or observing her kitchen activities from a safe distance. Most significantly, he began to accept being indoors for longer periods, no longer showing signs of anxiety when doors closed or walls surrounded him. It was as if the snowstorm had provided a necessary transition, a time of enforced shelter that allowed him to rediscover the benefits of human proximity without the trauma of capture or confinement. As December deepened and Christmas approached, Ashen's improved health became evident to all who knew him. His coat had regained much of its luster, his limping was less pronounced, and he had filled out to a healthier weight. Claire Watson's treatment plan, combined with the consistent care of his many human friends, had worked wonders for his physical condition. More remarkable, however, was the change in his demeanor. The wary, frightened cat who had escaped the carrier in the veterinary parking lot had been transformed, not into a docile pet, but into a dignified presence who had found his own unique way of being in the world, neither fully wild nor fully tame, but somewhere in between that suited his nature perfectly. This transformation was perhaps most evident during St. Mark's annual Christmas pageant, held on the Sunday before Christmas. The sanctuary was filled with families, the air fragrant with pine boughs and cinnamon, as children enacted the familiar nativity story. Tyler played a shepherd, Emma an angel, and May narrated with clear, careful diction. Halfway through the performance, as Mary and Joseph sought shelter at the inn, a movement near the altar caught the audience's attention. Ashen had entered through his special window and was making his way across the sanctuary, his grey form moving with quiet purpose through the assembled congregation. Parents reached to hold back children who might have tried to pet him, but Ashen needed no protection. He navigated the crowded space with calm assurance, eventually settling near the children's manger scene, where he sat with Paws tucked neatly beneath him, golden eyes reflecting the candlelight. The children, accustomed to his appearances by now, incorporated his presence into their performance without missing a beat. Tyler, as the shepherd, included him in his lines. "Look, even the animals come to welcome the child." The audience smiled, charmed by this unscripted addition to the familiar story. When the pageant concluded and families began to disperse for the reception in the fellowship hall, Ashen remained by the manger, seemingly content amid the bustling activity. Children approached to show him to younger siblings or visiting relatives, always respecting the boundaries he had established, close but not touching, admiring but not grabbing. "He's a Christmas miracle," one grandmother was overheard saying to her grandson, a wild thing choosing to join the celebration. Father James, overhearing this comment, smiled thoughtfully. "Perhaps not so much a miracle as a reminder," he suggested, "that belonging can take many forms. Ashen has taught us that community doesn't always mean conformity." This observation resonated with many who had witnessed Ashen's journey over the past months. The cat who had escaped death's door had not simply survived, he had created a new model of existence for himself, one that honored both his need for independence and his capacity for connection. In doing so, he had inadvertently taught his human caretakers something valuable about respecting the nature of those who differ from the expected norm. As winter settled fully over Millfield, Bringing short days and long nights illuminated by holiday lights, Ashen continued his rounds, from church to school to Miriam's house and various points between. He became a familiar sight around town, recognized and greeted by shopkeepers, mail carriers, and dog walkers who had heard his story. Children left their sleds at the bottom of hills to point him out to friends. There goes Ashen, the community cat. Dog owners taught their pets to respect his passage. Leave him be. That's Ashen. He's special. Even Mr. Callan, who had once chased him with a broom, now nodded acknowledgement when their paths crossed at the school. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently over Millfield and families gathered for celebrations, Miriam sat in her living room, a small fire crackling in the fireplace she rarely used. A modest tree glowed in the corner, decorated with ornaments collected over decades of life. On the coffee table sat a plate of cookies and a cup of tea, alongside a small dish of the special food Claire had provided for Ashen. The house was quiet except for the occasional pop from the fireplace and the soft melody of carols playing on Miriam's old radio. Outside, snow continued to fall, transforming the world into a peaceful white expanse. Inside, warmth and light created a haven against winter's chill. Miriam was not expecting visitors. Her children had called earlier, sending love from distant states where their own families were celebrating. Friends had extended invitations, but she had declined politely, preferring the quiet of her own home on this particular evening. She was not lonely exactly, but contemplative, thinking of Christmases past and the changes that time brings to every life. A soft sound at the window drew her attention. There, peering through the glass, was a familiar grey face. Ashen had appeared as if summoned by her thoughts, his golden eyes luminous in the reflection of Christmas lights. Miriam rose and opened the door, admitting a swirl of snowflakes along with her visitor. "Merry Christmas, old fellow," she greeted him. "Fancy a warm place tonight?" Ashen shook snow from his fur and entered with his customary dignity. He inspected the room as he always did, noting the unusual fire and the decorated tree with cautious interest. After completing his survey, he approached Miriam's chair, where a small blanket had been placed on the floor beside it. Not a cat bed, which might have felt too presumptuous, but a soft place should he choose to use it. To Miriam's delight, he settled onto the blanket, arranging himself comfortably before beginning his grooming routine. The fire's warmth seemed to please him, and the quiet of the house suited his temperament. They sat together as the evening deepened, Miriam reading from her well-worn Bible, Ashen dozing beside her chair. At midnight, church bells rang across Millfield, announcing Christmas Day. The sound carried clearly through the snowy air, reaching even distant farmhouses with its message of joy and peace. In Miriam's living room, Ashen raised his head at the sound, ears perked forward, as if listening for something beyond human hearing. "Another year beginning," Miriam told him softly. "Who would have thought a few months ago that we'd be sitting here together on Christmas Eve? Life does take unexpected turns." As if in agreement, Ashen stood and stretched, then did something unprecedented. He approached Miriam's chair, and with a graceful leap that belied his age settled onto her lap. The weight of him, substantial now after months of good care, was a warm presence against her legs. His purr, no longer rusty but full and resonant, filled the quiet room. Miriam sat very still, hardly daring to breathe lest she disturb this moment of complete trust. Slowly, with infinite gentleness, she placed a hand on his back. The purring continued, even intensified. Tears pricked Miriam's eyes as she realized the magnitude of the gift she had been given. Not just companionship, but trust from a creature who had every reason to withhold it. "Merry Christmas, Ashen," she whispered, stroking his fur with careful tenderness. "And thank you." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Millfield in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, an elderly woman and an elderly cat, both survivors of loss, both navigators of loneliness, found in each other's company a peace that transcended words. It was not a conventional family gathering, perhaps, but it was, in its own way, a perfect celebration of the season's deepest meaning, finding light in darkness, warmth in cold, and connection where once there was solitude. And as midnight passed into the early hours of Christmas morning, Miriam and Ashen remained together, two beings who had learned that family can be found in the most unexpected places, and that belonging sometimes means creating a new definition of home. January brought bitter cold to Millfield, with temperatures that turned breath to vapor and made car engines protest each morning. For Ashen, however, January brought an unexpected gift. Routine. After months of adaptation, he had established a pattern that served his needs while accommodating his growing connections. Mornings found him at the church, where Father James provided breakfast. Midday often meant a visit to the school, where the children shared lunch scraps. Afternoons varied depending on the weather. Explorations when conditions allowed, or shelter at the church or warehouse when the cold became too bitter. Evenings increasingly meant Miriam's house. Since Christmas Eve, their relationship had deepened. Ashen hadn't become a traditional house cat. He still came and went as he pleased, disappearing sometimes for a day or more. But he had begun to spend nights indoors more often than not, particularly when temperatures dropped below freezing. Miriam had adapted her home to accommodate her unusual house guest. A small cat door had been installed in the back door, Claire Watson's suggestion, supported by a collection taken at St. Mark's. This allowed Ashen to enter and leave freely. Inside, certain areas had become Ashen's spots: the blanket by the fireplace, a sunny windowsill in the kitchen, a shelf cleared of knickknacks to provide an elevated perch. Most significantly, Miriam had begun leaving her bedroom door ajar at night. To her surprise and quiet joy, Ashen had taken to sleeping at the foot of her bed. Not every night, but often enough that she found herself listening for the soft pad of his feet as she drifted towards sleep. This comfortable routine was disrupted one particularly frigid Tuesday in late January. Miriam had awakened feeling unusually tired, a heaviness in her chest that she attributed to the dry winter air. By afternoon, a persistent cough had developed, and her usual walk to the corner market became a challenge that left her breathless and dizzy. Ashen, who had been dozing on the living room windowsill, watched with unusual intensity as she struggled to catch her breath after returning home. His golden eyes tracked her movements as she sank into her armchair, her face pale and drawn with fatigue. "Just need to rest a bit," she told him. Nothing to worry about. But by evening, Miriam's condition had worsened. The cough had deepened, bringing a worrying rattle from her chest, and color had risen in her cheeks that spoke of fever rather than health. When she tried to stand to prepare dinner, the room swam around her, forcing her back into the chair. Ashen remained unusually close, abandoning his customary distance to sit directly beside her chair. Occasionally he would rise and pace to the door, then return to her side, his behavior restless and uncharacteristic. When Miriam finally gave up on dinner and made her slow way to bed, he followed closely, watching as she sank onto the mattress without even changing into her nightgown. Through the night, Miriam's condition deteriorated. Fever dreams blended with reality as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The cough that had plagued her all day now prevented real rest, jerking her awake just as exhaustion pulled her towards sleep. Throughout this difficult night, Ashen maintained his vigil. Unlike his usual habit of sleeping at the foot of the bed, he positioned himself near Miriam's pillow, his body a warm presence against her shoulder. When coughing fits shook her, he would wait until they subsided, then gently press his head against her hand or arm. Morning brought no improvement. Miriam attempted to rise but found herself too weak to stand for more than a moment. The room spun alarmingly, and reaching for the telephone seemed beyond her strength. "Might be in a bit of trouble here, old fellow," she told Ashen. "Don't suppose you could call for help?" It was meant as a weak joke, but something in her tone seemed to register with Ashen. He stood, stretched briefly, then leapt from the bed and disappeared through the bedroom door. Miriam heard the distinctive sound of the cat door flapping, then silence. But Ashen had not abandoned her. Instead, driven by some instinct that transcended his usual caution, he had set out on an urgent mission. The bitter cold bit at his paws as he navigated the snow-covered sidewalks, moving with a purpose that overrode his normal, careful pace. His destination was clear: St. Mark's Church, where humans could regularly be found. The building stood dark and silent. Changing course, Ashen headed toward his next best option, the school. By the time he reached the school grounds, his paws were painful with cold, and his breath came in rapid, visible puffs. The school day had not yet begun, but lights burned in several windows. Among these early workers was Mr. Callan, who had just finished salting the main entrance when he noticed a grey shape moving rapidly across the playground. "Well, look who's out in this weather," he said to himself. "Must be desperate for breakfast to brave this cold." But as Ashen approached, Mr. Callan realized something was amiss. The cat's behavior was entirely different from his usual wary distance. Instead of circling cautiously, Ashen came directly to him, meowing with unusual volume and insistence. "What's got into you?" Mr. Callan asked. "Something wrong?" Ashen paced in tight circles, meowing repeatedly, then moved several steps away before looking back expectantly. When the janitor didn't immediately follow, Ashen returned and repeated the performance. "You want me to follow you, like in those old movies?" Mr. Callan's skeptical expression suggested he found the idea far-fetched. "I've got work to do, Cat. Kids will be here soon." Ashen's response was to nip lightly at the man's pant leg, then back away again, still vocalizing with unusual intensity. The behavior was so out of character, so clearly deliberate, that Mr. Callan found himself wavering. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, even as he set down his salt bucket. "I'm following a cat. Must be losing my mind." Nevertheless, he began to walk in the direction Ashen indicated. The cat moved ahead of him, frequently looking back to ensure he was following, leading him away from the school and toward the residential streets beyond. "Where are you taking me?" Mr. Callan called. "Isn't this the way to Miss Miriam's house?" At the mention of Miriam's name, Ashen meowed loudly and increased his pace. Mr. Callan, connecting dots that suddenly seemed obvious, felt his heart rate increase. He had known Miriam Thompson for decades. Their children had attended school together years ago. When they reached Miriam's modest house, Ashen darted to the back door, disappearing through the cat flap. Mr. Callan approached the front door and knocked firmly. When no answer came, he knocked again, calling Miriam's name. Testing the doorknob, he found it unlocked. Not unusual in a small town where many residents still maintained habits from more trusting times. "Miss Miriam?" he called as he stepped inside. "It's Don Callan. Are you all right?" A weak cough from the bedroom provided his answer. Following the sound, he found Miriam lying pale and disoriented, Ashen once again positioned protectively beside her pillow. One glance told Mr. Cullen that the situation was serious. "Miss Miriam, you're sick," he said, approaching the bed with concern etched on his weathered face. "We need to get you to a doctor." "Don?" Miriam's voice was faint, her eyes struggling to focus. "What are you doing here?" "Your cat came to get me," he replied, the words sounding strange even as he spoke them. "Led me right to your door." Without waiting for a response, Mr. Callan pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911, reporting Miriam's symptoms with calm efficiency. After ensuring help was on the way, he called the school to report he would be late, then set about making Miriam as comfortable as possible while they waited. Throughout these preparations, Ashen remained on the bed, watchful but no longer agitated now that human help had arrived. His mission accomplished, he had settled into a quieter vigilance, golden eyes moving between Miriam and Mr. Callan as if assessing the situation continuously. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes. The paramedics moved efficiently, checking vital signs and preparing Miriam for transport. Their expressions grew serious as they listened to her lungs and measured her oxygen levels. "We'll need to take you to the hospital, ma'am," one told her gently. "Your oxygen is lower than we'd like, and that cough needs proper treatment." As they prepared to transfer Miriam to the stretcher, she reached out a weak hand toward Ashen. "My cat," she whispered. "Who will feed him?" "I'll take care of it," Mr. Callan promised, surprising himself with the offer. "Got his special food right here in the kitchen, right? I'll come by twice a day until you're home." As the paramedics wheeled Miriam from the bedroom, Ashen followed as far as the living room, maintaining a careful distance but clearly reluctant to let Miriam out of his sight. He watched from the windowsill as she was loaded into the ambulance. Word of Ashen's dramatic intervention spread quickly through Millfield's interconnected community. Rebecca shared the story during announcements at Sunday service. Ms. Daniels told the children at school. Claire Watson mentioned it to clients at her veterinary practice. The tale grew slightly with each retelling, taking on the quality of local legend, how the community cat had saved Miss Miriam's life through intelligence and devotion. For Ashen, however, life continued much as before, albeit with one significant absence. He maintained his rounds between familiar locations, accepted food from various caretakers, and spent nights either at the church or at Miriam's house, where Mr. Callan had taken to leaving a lamp on so the place doesn't feel empty. Miriam remained hospitalized for 10 days, her condition serious enough to warrant extended care but responding well to treatment. Claire Watson visited regularly and provided updates to the community of caregivers who had formed around both Miriam and Ashen. When the day of Miriam's homecoming arrived, a small delegation gathered at her house to prepare for her arrival. Rebecca had organized a cleaning brigade. The children had created welcome signs and arranged flowers. Mr. Callan made sure Ashen's areas were tidy and well stocked. Ashen himself had been at the church that morning, But as if sensing the significance of the day, he appeared on Miriam's porch, just as Claire's car pulled into the driveway. From his elevated position, he watched as Claire and a middle-aged woman who resembled Miriam helped the elderly woman from the passenger seat. Miriam looked thinner and more fragile than when she had left, her movements careful and her breathing still labored despite improvement. But her eyes were clear and alert, taking in the welcome committee with evident emotion. It was then that Miriam spotted Ashen, sitting perfectly still at the far end of the porch, his golden eyes fixed on her face. "And there he is," she said softly, "the hero of the hour." Miriam slowly approached the cat who had saved her life. She simply extended her hand, palm down, stopping well short of actually touching Ashen. "Hello, old fellow," she said quietly. "Did you miss me?" For a long moment Ashen remained motionless. Then with deliberate grace he stood, stretched and closed the distance between them. He sniffed her extended hand thoroughly, perhaps noting the unfamiliar hospital scents. Then, to the delight of the watching humans, he pressed his head against her fingers, a gesture of recognition and acceptance that spoke volumes without a sound. "I'll take that as a yes," Miriam said, her voice thick with emotion. As January's bitter cold gradually yielded to February's tentative thaw, life in Millfield settled into new patterns. Throughout these changes, Ashen maintained his distinctive balance of independence and connection. He still made his rounds between familiar locations, still disappeared occasionally for solitary wanderings, still approached human contact on his own terms. But he also spent more nights at Miriam's house than elsewhere, his presence a quiet comfort as she recovered her strength. In that balance between freedom and connection, between independence and belonging, lay the essence of the relationship that had transformed both their lives, a relationship built not on possession, but on mutual respect and the simple joy of chosen companionship. March arrived in Millfield with capricious moods, one day offering tantalizing glimpses of spring, the next reverting to winter's grip. The town emerged gradually from winter's cocoon as residents ventured out more frequently, eager for fresh air after the long hibernation. For Ashen, this transitional season brought new activities to observe. The school playground filled with children shedding heavy coats, their games more expansive as snowbanks receded. The church garden showed the first green shoots pushing through soil still marked with patches of crusty snow, and Miriam's porch became a place where she could once again sit comfortably in the lengthening afternoon light, a quilt across her lap and a book in her hands. Miriam's recovery had progressed steadily, though not without setbacks. The pneumonia had left her more fragile than before. Her breathing sometimes labored after modest exertion. Claire Watson had insisted on follow-up appointments and a new regimen of medications to strengthen her lungs and heart. "You need to be careful this spring," Claire had advised during a recent visit. "Your immune system took a serious hit. No gardening in damp soil, no sitting in drafts, and absolutely no skipping medications." Miriam had nodded dutifully, though her expression suggested she found the restrictions tiresome. "Between you and my daughter calling every other day, I'm the most supervised senior citizen in Millfield," she had commented dryly. What neither mentioned directly was how Ashen had adjusted his own routine to accommodate Miriam's convalescence. His evening arrivals had become more predictable, often coinciding with the time she took her medications. He seemed to sense her good and bad days, remaining closer when her breathing was more labored, wandering farther when her strength allowed light housekeeping or short walks. The most significant change was more subtle. Since her return from the hospital, Ashen had begun sleeping not just at the foot of her bed, but beside her pillow, his warm presence a comfort during nights when breathing difficulties made sleep elusive. This deepening bond made what lay ahead particularly challenging. For weeks, Claire had been gently reminding Miriam that Ashen was overdue for a follow-up visit to the clinic. The blood tests from his initial examination had shown early kidney issues, not surprising in a cat his age, but requiring monitoring and possibly medication adjustment. Additionally, he needed booster vaccinations and a thorough dental cleaning that could only be performed under anesthesia. "He's doing remarkably well considering what he's been through," Claire explained one afternoon, as she and Miriam watched Ashen sunning himself on the porch railing. "But preventive care now could give him years of good quality life." Miriam nodded, her expression troubled. "It's just the getting him there that worries me. You know how he feels about carriers and clinics. After everything, I hate the thought of betraying his trust." Claire understood the concern all too well. Ashen's entire journey had begun with an escape from a carrier on the way to a veterinary clinic. To subject him to a similar experience, even with the best intentions, risked reawakening traumatic memories and potentially damaging the trust he had so cautiously extended. "What if we try a different approach?" Claire suggested after a thoughtful pause. "I could bring some equipment here for the basic exam and vaccinations. For the dental work and more extensive tests, we might be able to use mild sedation before transport. Would that work?" Miriam asked, hope brightening her voice. "I'd feel so much better if we could avoid frightening him." Claire nodded, already mentally planning the logistics. "It's not how we usually do things, but Ashen isn't a usual case." And so on a mild Saturday morning in late March, Claire's sedan pulled into Miriam's driveway, its trunk filled with basic veterinary supplies. Rebecca had come earlier to help Miriam prepare, moving furniture to create an open space in the living room and setting up a folding table covered with a familiar blanket, one that carried Ashen's own scent from his frequent naps. "Where is our patient?" Claire asked as she carried her medical bag inside. "In his favorite sunny spot in the kitchen," Miriam replied. "He knows something's up, hasn't taken his eyes off us since Rebecca started moving furniture." Claire smiled, unsurprised by Ashen's perceptiveness. Cats always know. "Let's get everything set up before we try to involve him." With Rebecca's help, Claire arranged her equipment on a side table: stethoscope, otoscope, various testing supplies, and the vaccines Ashen needed. She worked efficiently, but without rushing, aware that her calm demeanor would set the tone for what followed. "The goal is to make this as unlike a clinical experience as possible," she explained as she prepared. "No white coat, no strange examining room, no metal table, just a checkup in a place where he feels safe." When everything was ready, Miriam went to the kitchen where Ashen remained in his observation post on the windowsill. "Time for your checkup, old fellow," she told him conversationally. "Dr. Watson is here to make sure you're doing well." Rather than attempting to pick him up or coax him, Miriam simply returned to the living room, leaving the decision to Ashen. To everyone's relief, curiosity overcame caution, and he followed her, pausing in the doorway to assess the changed arrangement of the familiar room. His golden eyes took in every detail: the folding table with its familiar blanket, Claire's presence, the equipment laid out neatly. His whiskers twitched as he sampled the air, detecting the antiseptic smells that likely triggered memories of his last veterinary encounter. For a tense moment, the humans held their breath, wondering if he would bolt. Instead, after a long consideration that seemed to weigh trust against wariness, Ashen entered the room with deliberate steps. He approached Claire first, sniffing her extended hand thoroughly before moving to investigate the table. "That's it," Claire murmured approvingly. "Take your time. Get comfortable with everything." She made no move to rush the process, allowing Ashen to explore at his own pace. When he had satisfied his curiosity, he returned to Miriam, who had seated herself in her armchair and leapt onto her lap. "I think he's looking for reassurance," Claire observed. "This is a good sign. He trusts you to keep him safe." Miriam stroked Ashen gently, murmuring words of comfort. "It's all right, old fellow. No one's going to hurt you or take you away. Just a quick checkup to make sure you're healthy." After several minutes of this quiet reassurance, Claire suggested they try moving to the examination table. "Let's see if he'll go there voluntarily first. If not, we can start with him on your lap." Miriam carried Ashen to the table, where she continued to hold him as Claire began a gentle examination. To everyone's surprise and relief, Ashen permitted the handling with remarkable tolerance, his body tense but not struggling, as Claire checked his eyes, ears and teeth, listened to his heart and lungs, and palpated his abdomen. "His physical condition has improved dramatically," Claire reported as she worked. "Weight is good, coat is healthier, and that limp is barely noticeable now. The dental issues are still a concern, though. He's got some inflammation that needs attention." When it came time for vaccinations, Ashen flinched at the needle but remained calm, Miriam's continuing presence and gentle stroking apparently sufficient to overcome his anxiety. Claire worked quickly but gently, minimizing discomfort while maintaining a soothing patter of conversation. When the basic examination was complete, Claire stepped back with a satisfied nod. "He did beautifully. Much better than I expected, honestly." "So he's healthy?" Miriam asked, relief evident in her voice. "Overall, yes. The supplements and consistent care have made a tremendous difference." Claire's expression turned more serious. "But we still need to address those dental issues. The inflammation could lead to more serious problems if left untreated." The conversation turned to the more challenging aspect of Ashen's care, the dental cleaning that would require anesthesia and therefore transport to the clinic. Despite the success of the home examination, this remained a significant hurdle. Ashen's history suggested that any attempt to place him in a carrier might trigger extreme distress and potentially undo months of carefully built trust. "What if we don't use a carrier at all?" Rebecca suggested unexpectedly. "Could he travel in someone's lap, maybe with a mild sedative, as you mentioned before?" Claire considered this unconventional approach. "It's not how we'd usually transport an animal, but given Ashen's particular history and the short distance to the clinic, it might work." She turned to Miriam. "Would you be comfortable holding him during the drive? He seems most relaxed with you." Miriam nodded without hesitation. "Of course, whatever makes it easiest for him. We could schedule it for a quiet time at the clinic," Claire continued, warming to the idea. "Early morning, before regular appointments begin. Have everything ready so he goes straight into treatment without waiting." Plans began to take shape, a strategy designed specifically for Ashen's unique circumstances. Claire would provide a mild sedative to be given at home before transport. Miriam would hold Ashen during the short drive to the clinic. The procedure would be scheduled for first thing in the morning, with the staff briefed to create the calmest possible environment. "And I'll come too," Rebecca offered. "To drive, since Miriam will have her hands full, and to help however I can." The appointed day arrived in early April, bringing one of those perfect spring mornings that hint at summer's approach. Miriam had spent a restless night, anxiety about the coming procedure keeping her awake, long after Ashen had settled into his customary spot beside her pillow. "I feel like I'm planning to kidnap you," she had told him in the darkness, her hand gently stroking his fur. "Even though it's for your own good, it feels a bit like betrayal." When morning arrived, Rebecca appeared as promised, her calm confidence providing a welcome counterbalance to Miriam's nervousness. Claire had delivered the sedative the previous day, with careful instructions, and now the time had come to administer it. "Mix it with a small amount of his favorite food," Claire had advised. "Just enough to mask the taste, but not so much that he might leave some uneaten." Miriam followed these instructions precisely, preparing a tiny portion of the special wet food Ashen particularly enjoyed. To her relief, he consumed it without suspicion, the medication's taste apparently well disguised by the savory treatment. Those 20 minutes felt interminable to Miriam, who watched Ashen for any sign of distress. The medication's effect, when it became apparent, was subtle, a slight relaxation in his posture, a mild slowing of his movements, but no signs of discomfort or confusion. He remained alert, if somewhat more sedate than usual. "I think he's ready," Rebecca said finally. "Let's get the blanket to wrap him in, just for a bit of extra security." Miriam selected a soft throw that Ashen often napped on, his scent embedded in its fibers. With gentle movements, she gathered him into her arms, arranging the blanket to create a secure nest without restrictive confinement. Ashen accepted this handling with remarkable calm, his golden eyes slightly drowsy, but still tracking the familiar surroundings. The journey to the clinic unfolded with surprising smoothness. Rebecca drove carefully, avoiding sudden stops or sharp turns. Miriam sat in the back seat, Ashen cradled against her chest, maintaining a constant soft monologue of reassurance. Whether due to the mild sedation or the comfort of Miriam's familiar presence, Ashen remained calm throughout the drive, his body relaxed against hers. Claire was waiting at the clinic's side entrance when they arrived, holding the door open to allow them immediate entry. As planned, the waiting room was empty, the usual morning appointments delayed to accommodate Ashen's special needs. The treatment room had been modified to create a less clinical environment. A soft towel covered the metal examination table, the overhead lights had been dimmed in favor of softer lamp lighting, and a diffuser released a subtle, calming scent recommended for feline patients. "I'll need to take him now," Claire said gently to Miriam. "The anesthesia needs to be administered, and then we'll begin the dental work." This was the moment Miriam had dreaded, relinquishing Ashen to others. Even those she trusted with his care, she bent to press a light kiss to the top of his head, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago but now felt entirely natural. "I'll be waiting right here," she promised him. "Be brave, old fellow." With a final gentle stroke, she handed Ashen to Claire, who cradled him with professional competence tempered by evident affection. To everyone's relief, Ashen accepted this transfer without struggle, the combined effects of the sedative and months of rebuilding trust apparently sufficient to overcome his fear. That hour proved to be one of the longest in Miriam's memory. Despite Rebecca's attempts at distraction, Miriam found herself glancing at the clock every few minutes, worrying about Ashen's experience under anesthesia. "He's in good hands," Rebecca reminded her gently. Claire wouldn't have suggested this, if she wasn't confident it was both necessary and safe. Before Miriam could respond, the office door opened and Claire entered, still wearing her surgical scrubs, but with a smile that immediately eased some of Miriam's tension. "Everything went perfectly," she announced. "We removed the tartar buildup, treated the inflammation, and even extracted one tooth that was beyond saving. His gums will be sore for a day or two, but he should feel much better once that healing begins." They followed Claire back to the treatment room, where Ashen lay on a warming pad, his body covered with a light blanket. His breathing was deep and regular, and as they watched, his paws twitched slightly, the first signs of returning consciousness. "Talk to him," Claire suggested to Miriam. "Let him hear your voice as he wakes up." Miriam moved to the table, placing a gentle hand on Ashen's side. "Hello, old fellow," she said softly. "You did so well. Time to wake up now. We're going home soon." At the sound of her voice, Ashen's ears twitched, then his eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening as awareness returned. He made a small sound, more exhale than meow, and attempted to raise his head. "Easy now," Miriam soothed. "You're still a bit wobbly. Take your time." Recovery from anesthesia took another 30 minutes, during which Ashen progressed from drowsy confusion to more alert awareness. By the time he was able to sit up on his own, his golden eyes had regained their characteristic attentiveness. The return journey mirrored the morning's trip, with Ashen once again cradled in Miriam's arms in the back seat of Rebecca's car. Though still somewhat sedated, he seemed more aware of his surroundings, occasionally shifting position or looking up at Miriam as if seeking confirmation that all was well. When they finally arrived at Miriam's house, Rebecca helped settle Ashen in his favorite spot, a sunny patch on the living room rug where he often napped during afternoons. A fresh water dish was placed nearby, along with a small amount of the soft food Claire had provided. Left alone with Ashen, Miriam settled into her armchair with a book, content to keep quiet watch as he continued his recovery. After about an hour, Ashen rose somewhat unsteadily and made his way to Miriam's chair. With a determined effort that spoke of his returning strength, he leapt onto her lap and settled there, his body a warm weight against her legs. "Well, hello," she said, surprised and touched by this unexpected gesture. "Feeling more like yourself, are you?" Ashen's response was to press his head against her hand, initiating contact in a way that seemed to say more clearly than words could have. Trust remained intact. Whatever confusion or discomfort the day had brought, it had not damaged the bond between them. As April unfolded into full spring, bringing warm days and blooming flowers to Millfield, Ashen's health continued to improve. The dental procedure had relieved discomfort he had likely been experiencing for months, allowing him to eat more comfortably and improving his overall well-being. Claire's follow-up examinations, now conducted without drama in Miriam's living room, confirmed that his physical condition was remarkable for a cat of his age and history. On a particularly lovely evening in late April, Miriam sat on her porch, watching as twilight softened the edges of her small garden, where spring flowers nodded in a gentle breeze. Ashen lay nearby on the railing, his grey fur silvered by the fading light, his golden eyes half closed in contentment. "Who would have thought," Miriam mused aloud, "that an old cat and an old woman could have such adventures?" Ashen opened one eye, regarding her with that inscrutable gaze that seemed to hold wisdom beyond human understanding. Then, in a gesture that had become precious in its rarity, he rose, stretched, and moved to settle beside her on the porch swing, close enough for connection, yet maintaining the small distance that honored his independent nature. Together they watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, two beings who had found in each other not just companionship, but a more profound lesson, that new beginnings are possible at any age, and that what appears to be an ending might, with courage and openness, transform into an unexpected chapter of grace. The warmth of May brought Millfield to vibrant life. Gardens burst with color, trees unfurled fresh green canopies, and the town square became a gathering place for residents emerging from winter's confinement. Saturday mornings now featured a small farmers' market where local growers displayed early produce. Bakers offered fresh bread, and craftspeople spread their wares beneath the spreading oaks. For Ashen, this season of renewal reflected his own transformation. The thin, frightened cat who had escaped the carrier 6 months earlier had become a respected presence in the community, still independent, still maintaining his dignity, but now connected to the human world in ways that would have seemed impossible during those first desperate days of survival. His daily rounds had evolved into a comfortable routine that balanced freedom with belonging. Mornings often found him on Miriam's porch, sunning himself as she gardened nearby. Midday might bring a visit to the school, where the children had created a special feeding station behind the cafeteria. Afternoons were for exploration, the town square, the park, the quiet spaces behind businesses, where interesting scents and occasional treats could be found. Evenings increasingly meant home with Miriam, though he still disappeared occasionally for a night or two, drawn perhaps by some instinct for solitude that never quite left him. He had come to appreciate the comfort of a warm house, a soft bed, and the quiet companionship of the woman who had earned his trust one patient day at a time. It was during one of these evening returns, after a 2-day absence that had left Miriam trying not to worry, that something unusual occurred. Ashen appeared at the back door as twilight deepened, meowing with uncharacteristic insistence until Miriam opened it to admit him. Instead of entering, however, he remained on the step, looking up at her with urgent golden eyes before taking several steps away and then turning back expectantly. "What is it?" Miriam asked, recognizing the behavior from that fateful January morning when Ashen had led Mr. Callan to her bedside. "Is something wrong?" Ashen repeated the performance, moving away, looking back, meowing with unusual volume. The message was unmistakable. "Follow me." Despite the lateness of the hour and her own fatigue, Miriam didn't hesitate. She grabbed a light jacket, her house keys, and a small flashlight kept by the door for emergencies. "All right, old fellow," she said, stepping outside. "Show me what's so important." Ashen led her down the back garden path and through the gap in the hedge that he often used as a shortcut. The route he chose was familiar at first, toward the church, along streets Miriam knew well. But then he turned onto a side road she rarely traveled, leading toward the commercial area where the veterinary clinic was located. But Ashen bypassed the veterinary clinic, continuing past darkened storefronts and empty parking lots. As they approached a small strip mall anchored by a hardware store, his pace quickened. He led Miriam behind the buildings to a loading area littered with empty pallets and cardboard boxes. "What on earth?" Miriam began, then fell silent as Ashen disappeared behind a large dumpster. She followed cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the gathering darkness. There, in a makeshift nest of flattened cardboard, lay a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 20, her thin frame curled protectively around a backpack, her face pale even in the dim light. At the sound of Miriam's approach, she startled awake, instinctively shrinking back against the wall. "I'm not causing trouble," she said quickly, her voice hoarse. "I'll move on in the morning." Miriam's heart contracted at the fear in the young woman's eyes, a fear not unlike what she had seen in Ashen's gaze those first weeks on her porch. "I'm not here to chase you away," she said gently. "My friend brought me." She gestured toward Ashen, who had stationed himself between them, watching the interaction with attentive eyes. The young woman's expression shifted from wariness to confusion. "The cat? He brought you. He's quite remarkable that way," Miriam replied, keeping her tone conversational, unthreatening. "My name is Miriam Thompson. May I ask yours?" After a moment's hesitation, the young woman answered, Ellie Winters." "Well, Ellie Winters, you don't look very comfortable there. Are you hungry?" Ellie's gaze darted between Miriam and Ashen, suspicion warring with obvious need. "Why would you care? You don't know me." Miriam smiled, thinking of another wary creature who had asked similar questions with silent eyes months ago. "Let's just say I've learned something about helping those who need it, even when they're not sure they want to be helped." She extended a hand, not quite touching, offering rather than insisting. "My house is 3 blocks away. Hot shower, warm meal, safe place to sleep. No strings attached." "Just for tonight," Ellie said finally, rising stiffly from her makeshift bed. "And I can work for it, cleaning or whatever you need done." The walk back to Miriam's house was mostly silent, Ellie maintaining a careful distance while Ashen led the way, occasionally looking back as if to ensure both humans were following. When they reached the small white house with its welcoming porch light, Ellie hesitated at the gate. "It's really okay?" she asked, vulnerability breaking through her carefully maintained facade. "You're not going to call the police or social services or something?" "No police, no social services," Miriam assured her. "Just a hot meal and a safe place to rest. Any decisions beyond that are yours to make." Inside, Miriam's practical nature took over. She showed Ellie to the small guest bathroom, provided a clean towel and a set of her daughter's clothes left from her last visit, and set about preparing a simple meal. Soup warming on the stove, bread sliced and buttered, tea steeping in the pot. When Ellie emerged from the bathroom, her dark hair damp and her thin frame swimming in the borrowed clothes, she looked younger and more vulnerable than she had in the harsh glare of the flashlight. She accepted the offered meal with murmured thanks, her hunger evident in the way she tried not to eat too quickly. Miriam kept conversation light, asking no probing questions that might trigger Ellie's defenses. Instead, she spoke of neutral topics: the spring weather, the farmer's market, her garden's progress. Gradually, as the warm food and safe environment worked their magic, Ellie's rigid posture relaxed slightly. "Is he really your cat?" she asked finally, nodding toward Ashen, who had moved to his customary evening spot on the living room rug. "He doesn't act like any cat I've known." Miriam smiled. "Ashen belongs to himself primarily. He allows me to share his life, and I consider that a privilege." She went on to tell Ashen's story: the escape from the carrier, the months of building trust, the community that had formed around him. She spoke of his intelligence, his dignity, and the moment he had saved her life by fetching help when she fell ill. "And now he's done it again, it seems," she concluded. "Brought help to someone who needed it." Ellie's gaze moved to Ashen, who returned her look with his usual inscrutable calm. "Why would he care about me? I've only seen him around a few times, left him some of my food once or twice, but that's it. Kindness doesn't go unnoticed," Miriam said simply. "Not by those who've known its absence." Something in these words seemed to touch Ellie deeply. Her eyes filled suddenly, tears spilling down cheeks thin from too many missed meals. "I didn't think anyone would notice," she whispered. "If I just disappeared." That night, Ellie slept in the guest room, the door left slightly ajar at her request, a need for escape routes that Miriam understood all too well. Ashen stationed himself in the hallway between the two bedrooms, a silent sentinel, ensuring all was well within his domain. Morning brought cautious conversations over breakfast. Ellie shared fragments of her story: a difficult home situation in a town 50 miles away, a hasty departure with little planning, a job that had fallen through, leaving her without resources in a strange place. "I don't know what to do next," Ellie admitted finally, staring into her coffee cup as if it might contain answers. "I can't go home, but I can't keep sleeping behind dumpsters either." "No, you can't," Miriam agreed, "but perhaps there's a third option." She described the network of support that had formed around Ashen, people like Rebecca, Claire, Father James, and others who had found ways to help without controlling, to offer without demanding, to care without confining. In the silence that followed, Ashen entered the kitchen, moving with his characteristic quiet dignity. He approached Ellie's chair, considering her with those knowing golden eyes, before gently pressing his head against her hand, the same gesture of acceptance he had first offered Miriam after her return from the hospital. "Okay," Ellie said finally. "I'll meet your friends, but I still want to work for my keep. I'm not looking for handouts." "Fair enough," Miriam replied, respecting the young woman's pride. "As it happens, this old house could use some attention, and these old bones aren't as nimble as they once were. Perhaps we can help each other." And so began another unexpected chapter in the story that had begun with a desperate leap from a carrier in a veterinary parking lot. Over the next weeks, Ellie became a part of Miriam's household, not a dependent but a contributing member who found dignity in work and belonging in gradual connections. She painted the porch railing, weeded the garden beds, and tackled the attic organization that had been deferred since Harold's passing. In return, Miriam provided not just shelter and meals, but introductions to her network of friends and community resources. Rebecca helped Ellie update her resume and practice interview skills. Claire mentioned an opening for a veterinary assistant at her clinic. Father James connected her with the church's young adult group, offering social connections without pressure. Throughout this transition, Ashen maintained a watchful presence, observing Ellie's integration into the household and community with apparent approval. He seemed to recognize in her something familiar, perhaps the wariness of one who has learned to expect disappointment, or the careful testing of boundaries that comes from having had them violated. As May yielded to June, bringing longer days and the first real warmth of summer, Ellie began working part-time at Claire's veterinary clinic. The position was entry-level, mostly cleaning, filing, and answering phones, but Claire recognized Ellie's natural affinity for animals and began teaching her basic care skills during quiet periods. Their comfortable routine was disrupted one evening when Claire Watson arrived unexpectedly at Miriam's door. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," she said. "There's something I need to discuss with you. With both of you, actually." Inside, settled in Miriam's living room, Claire explained that earlier that day, a couple had come to the clinic with their elderly dog, a routine visit that had taken an unexpected turn when they noticed the framed photo of Ashen that sat on the reception desk. "That's our cat," the woman had exclaimed, pointing to the image. "That's Ash. We've been looking for him for months." The couple, Claire explained, were Robert and Martha Wilson. They had described in detail a grey cat with distinctive golden eyes who had escaped from his carrier in the veterinary clinic parking lot the previous October. "They showed me photos on their phone," Claire said gently. "There's no doubt it's him. They called him Ash, not Ashen, but it's definitely the same cat." A heavy silence fell over the room. Ashen, who had been listening from his perch on the windowsill, seemed to sense the tension. He jumped down and approached Miriam, pressing against her legs as if in reassurance. "Did they say why they were taking him to be put down?" Miriam asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire's expression softened with compassion. "That's just it. They weren't. It was a regular checkup for vaccinations. The carrier latch was faulty, and when he bolted, they searched for hours. They've been checking shelters and posting flyers ever since." "What do they want?" Miriam asked, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "They want to see him, of course, to confirm it's really their Ash. And yes, they hope to take him home." "But this is his home now," Ellie protested. "He chose Miriam. He saved her life." "I'll let them come," Miriam said finally. "But what happens afterward? That will depend on Ashen. If he recognizes them, if he wants to go with them, I won't stand in his way. But if he chooses to stay, they need to respect that." The following afternoon, Claire arrived with an elderly couple who looked to be near Miriam's own age. Martha stepped forward, her eyes already glistening with unshed tears. "We can't thank you enough," she said, her voice quavering. "When Dr. Watson called to say Ash was alive, that he'd been safe all these months, it was like a miracle." Before further conversation could develop, a soft thump announced Ashen's arrival through the cat door in the kitchen. He padded into the living room with his usual unhurried grace, pausing when he noticed the unfamiliar visitors. His whiskers twitched as he sampled the air, taking in their scents. "Ash!" Martha's voice broke on the name, her hand reaching toward her husband for support. "Oh, Robert, it's him." "It's really him." Martha slowly knelt and extended her hand, palm up. "Ash," she called softly. "Come here, sweet boy." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with deliberate steps, Ashen approached. Not rushing, not fleeing, but moving with measured dignity. He sniffed Martha's extended hand thoroughly, his whiskers brushing her skin as he absorbed her scent. After completing his examination of the Wilsons, Ashen did something unexpected. He turned and walked to Miriam, pressing against her legs in a gesture that had come to signal affection and trust. Only then did he return to Martha, allowing her to gently stroke his head, once, twice, before moving away to settle on the rug in the center of the room. "He remembers us," Martha said, tears flowing freely down her lined cheeks. "But he's connected to you too, Miss Thompson, just as Dr. Watson said." What followed was a conversation unlike any Miriam could have anticipated. The Wilsons shared stories of Ash's earlier life, how they had adopted him as a kitten 15 years ago, how he had comforted Martha through breast cancer treatment a decade past, how he had always been independent yet affectionate. "It's extraordinary," Robert said finally. "All this time, we thought he was lost, maybe suffering, while actually, he was creating a whole new life. Building a community even." "What are you saying?" Claire asked gently. Robert straightened his shoulders as if preparing to bear a weight. "I think we're saying that what we want might not be what's best for Ash." He looked at his wife, who nodded encouragement. "Maybe there's a middle way, one that honors all the connections he's made, including those with us." What emerged from the conversation was something none of them could have predicted, a shared arrangement that acknowledged both Ashen's history and his present reality. The Wilsons lived on the other side of Millfield, just a 15-minute walk from Miriam's house. Rather than forcing Ashen to choose one home over another, they proposed a flexible arrangement where he could visit both, maintaining connections to all the humans who had become important in his life. Practical details were discussed: a tag for his collar with both addresses and phone numbers, a consistent feeding schedule, regular communication between Miriam and the Wilsons to ensure his health needs were met. Behind these logistics lay a more profound agreement: to honor Ashen's nature by allowing him the freedom to choose his own path. "It's not how most people would handle this situation," Robert acknowledged as the meeting drew to a close. "But then, Ash has never been most cats, and it seems he's found humans who understand that." In the days and weeks that followed, the unusual arrangement proved more natural than anyone might have expected. Ashen established a new pattern of movement that included occasional visits to the Wilson home, where he was welcomed with joy but never confined. He would stay for hours or sometimes overnight, accepting affection and familiar comforts before making his way back to Miriam's house or one of his other regular haunts. For the humans involved, the arrangement fostered unexpected connections. The Wilsons became part of Miriam's expanding social circle, joining her for coffee on the porch or accompanying her to Sunday services at St. Mark's. They even attended Ellie's housewarming when she moved into the apartment above the bookstore in August, bringing a handmade cat perch as a gift for when Ashen visited. As summer reached its peak, bringing long golden evenings to Millfield, the story of Ashen's remarkable journey became something of a local legend. Visitors to the farmer's market might hear it from Rebecca as she sold her handmade soaps. Children at the school shared it with new classmates, pointing proudly to their cat when he made his occasional appearances at lunchtime. The impact of one grey cat's interrupted journey had rippled outward in ways no one could have foreseen that rainy October day. Their frightened escape had transformed into a community connection. What had seemed an ending had become a beginning of something far richer and more complex. On a particularly lovely evening in late August, Miriam sat on her porch with Martha Wilson, watching as fireflies began to rise from the garden. Ellie was there too, having stopped by after her shift at the clinic, and Rebecca, who had brought fresh bread from the church baking ministry. On the porch railing, Ashen lounged in the fading light, his grey fur burnished to silver by the setting sun. "You know," Martha said thoughtfully, "when we lost him that day, I thought my heart would break. Couldn't imagine how we'd go on without him." Miriam nodded understanding. "And when I found him on my porch, I had no idea how much he would change my life, how many doors he would open. Funny how what looks like the worst thing can turn into something beautiful," Rebecca observed. "If he hadn't decided to trust again after being hurt," Ellie added quietly, her own journey of trust reflected in her words. As twilight deepened into evening, Ashen made his way from the railing to Miriam's lap, then to Martha's, then back to his favorite spot on the porch swing. The movement seemed deliberate, a physical manifestation of the connections he had woven, not forced to choose one belonging over another, but free to honor all the relationships that constituted his rich, complex life. And in this freedom, in this honoring of his nature and needs, lay the most profound lesson he had taught the humans who loved him, that true belonging is never about possession or exclusivity, but about creating space for each being to be fully itself while remaining connected to others. The cat who had escaped death's door had not only found a new life for himself, but had shown an entire community how to build connections across differences, how to make room for the unexpected, and how to recognize that what might appear to be an ending could, with courage and openness, transform into an unforeseen beginning. As stars appeared in the darkening sky above Millfield, Ashen settled into a comfortable curl on the porch swing, golden eyes half closed in contentment. Around him the conversation flowed on, plans for the upcoming fall festival, news from the veterinary clinic, stories of the day's small triumphs and challenges. He listened, as he always did, a quiet presence at the center of a community that had formed, improbably but beautifully, around one elderly cat who had jumped from a carrier on a rainy October day and found, in what should have been his final journey, the beginning of an unexpected life.